How's unrealistic goal of finishing in 2 hours? We'll see if we can get through this agenda. So I will call meeting to order at 5:29. And is there anything else we need to do? Sorry, I'm still learning protocols for board retreat. We're good? Okay. So first item is around in the section of district strategic planning. This is a follow-up from Harry from the session that we had in, was it early November? October? Yeah, early November. And so he's put together some language from our work session around a vision of success and pulled together the comments. And so we broke it into three kind of buckets, and that's consistent with the feedback in the small group sessions that we had. And so I don't know if you guys have all had a chance to read it, if you have thoughts, comments, reactions to it. I think from my perspective, I think the intent is right in the three main bullets, one around the robust learning opportunities, meaning the changing needs of all students. The second around the achievement gap, that was a clear theme from the working groups. And then the third one, which was a little bit new that came out, I think, was around the community support and community engagement. And so I felt like he captured sort of the three main buckets. I'm not sure the language from a statement perspective is where we want it to be. It's pretty long. Usually vision statements are just that, a statement. Not paragraphs with parentheticals, but we can certainly wordsmith if we feel like if the intent is good for these three things, or do you feel like something's missing? Reactions, comments?
Yeah, I agree. I think the intent is there. I felt he captured the discussion and points, but yeah, this is definitely
A lot of words.
it's a lot of words. So yeah,
A lot of words.
So this is a very minor thing, but it does say where everyone feels responsible for meeting the needs of Iowa City's children.
Oh gosh, that is we
Yeah.
can't just say that, right?
So
We usually put district in there so that it's comprehensive. We don't want to,
it's a minor wording issue, but kind of a big
oh, it makes a
deal.
huge difference.
Yeah, no, that's not representative of our district, so that would obviously need to change. And so we can wordsmith. I could take a crack at putting together a statement and sending it out to board members for review. I just was playing around with stuff over the weekend, and a statement, something like this. I'm not saying these are the precise words, but something around all students achieve at high levels through active engagement with personalized learning experiences and with the support of the community invested in every student's success. So something along those lines. It's that the personalized approach, high achievement levels for all students, which is what's getting at that achievement gap thing without coming right out and saying it. We could come right out and say it if you want, but then that support of the community, I think, is really important. So I think we do need to winnow this down to a statement that we can feel good about. I think the other thing too is, typically with the vision statement, you're going to take it out, you're going to get stakeholder input and review, actually really spend some time wordsmithing and also getting stakeholder engagement and buy-in. So your team, ICEA probably, parents, even taking this out to the community and getting that kind of feedback. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about it. I feel like if we could develop a good working draft of a vision statement that we could say we're using internally, and kind of using that as a guidepost, and then when we get into the more, cyclical planning cycle, Steve, because I feel like we're a little bit off cycle. If we get back into a cycle for next year, we could actually go through a process of external community stakeholder engagement, teacher engagement, and take it from a working internal draft to our vision statement that we put up on the school district website. I don't know that I'm feeling like we don't necessarily have the time or energy to go through that kind of very robust process, but if we can get a working draft that we're comfortable with from a guidance perspective for board work, and then craft a process, Steve, for next cycle to get that
Sure.
broader input, that would be, I feel like, a reasonable thing to do. Yep. So we could just take what Harry gave us and use that as our internal working draft and not even try to wordsmith it. We could try to wordsmith something into a statement. I'd be happy to take a crack and send it out to folks, and we can, next time we have one of these, kind of put it up on the board, and people can bring comments and feedback.
Well, I think we need to use what we have to continue even the rest of this meeting, right? I mean, if we're gonna work on goals, we need to support some sort of vision, even if it's in an amorphous form right now and sort of this initial pass. It's, you know, I mean, that's what your goals are supposed to do, is sort of guide that vision and at least be tied to it. So I think the exact words that are there, again, I don't think are super critical right now. I mean, I think the end result is going to be critical, that it's got good meaning behind it. But if all of the ideas that kind of Harry's thrown in together into, you know, a fairly long thing can guide our goals, I think we can push off the writing of the vision later. If we can't do that, then we got to do it now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But I think
we can use this as a starting point.
it's the guiding piece. And so do we feel like anything's missing from these three buckets that are here? Robust, and for me, it's robust learning opportunities, closing the achievement gap, with high expectations for everyone, and then that community support piece. Those are the three big strands.
Yeah, it hits on all three of those, so like Sean was saying, I think we could use this as sort of the guiding principle, deal with wordsmithing as we
Later.
Yeah.
But I typed in the same thing and every line it just.
Yeah, so we're good with using these three big themes as crafted as our guide rails for the next round of discussions on strategic
Try
goals.
I'm going back to when,
Past the
you know,
deadline and then
before
they reset it.
we even had our session with Harry, you know, when we had
Because
our
if your
first
password
retreat, we were looking
expires,
for
we can't do anything, we have to reset
a
it.
guiding vision for the board, as opposed to a concise vision statement,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think we were looking bigger picture, which was much more encompassing than a sentence, right? I think, you know, we do a lot of vision statements, various things that I've done too, and yes, a sentence is important there, and it is the kind of thing where you put up on a banner on a website or something like that, but I think the underlying intent can be much more broad-based. I think that's what we were originally looking for, anyway, to give us all some sort of guidance where we wanted to get to. I don't think you can boil that down to a sentence.
You can try. But it is really about the intent. What do we want to be as a district 5 years from now? What do we want to look like? And that should then guide what work we do and the priorities that we establish to get us to that future state. And in these three things, robust learning opportunities for all of our students, closing that achievement gap while maintaining very high expectations, and engaging our community as part of that process, those are the three things, and that broader intent. I mean, the community piece feels like something we should talk about from a board goal standpoint when we get there, because I'm not sure that's fully represented. We sort of get at it kind of an equity plan stuff, there's engagement work in there, but that for me was a really interesting add. And we'll need to decide how we want to tackle that one.
And I feel it's narrower than the mission statement. So we have all of that, which the mission statement is good. We have a lot of good things in there, but it's also very wordy and not super specific. And this is, okay, what this board wants to focus on are these three aspects. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
So let's keep this in front of us while we move on to the next topic, which is our district goals. So really, this is the strategic plan, and then the accomplishments from last year. We covered this material in the last meeting. It was really helpful, Amy, Matt, to hear your overview of kind of your goal alignment and work that's been done. And so I guess one question I would ask the group, with that vision in mind, are there any shifts or changes that we would want to make at this point to the strategic goals that we have? Or are they sufficient to continue to properly align to mission vision and to set the context for the more granular goals we'll be talking about shortly?
Can I just interject for a minute too? So just so you understand, and I know they went through it last time, but just a reminder about our cyclical planning process. So the board gives us the goals, and then if you remember that chart, the next thing that we do is we internalize those at each building. And then if you remember the template that we showed you, so each building has to take the district goal and put it in place at the building. And then we actually are asking each teacher, how do you take that and operationalize it in your classroom? So if you're I've just spent 2 hours at Kirkwood at a staff listening post. If you're a third grade teacher at Kirkwood, if the district goal is, I'm going to help increase math achievement in my classroom, and I'm going to help close the gap with students in defined need, then how does that operationalize as a building? What are we going to do collectively as a building, and then what am I going to do in my classroom? So from a planning process, the board handed that to us. We've then handed it to the building principals, and then the building principals have handed it to their teachers. So they've already put their comprehensive school improvement plan in place for this school year. So they're using these goals to drive the work that they're doing this school year. So as you think about it from a board perspective, as you think about the goals, and it goes back to kind of that discussion about vision and mission. So if the vision is 5 years out and the mission is how we're accomplishing that as we're moving forward, the goal setting process should be one in which if we're going to change goals, that we're looking at it comprehensively as a team and saying, what do we need to add, subtract, multiply, divide here so that by next March, if there are changes to the goals, we can make those, because we want that to inform decisions about what we're doing for summer curriculum writing, what we're doing for professional development over the summer, how we're tuning up our principals to be ready to put their CSIPs in place next fall. So the horizon is longer than tomorrow on this one. So I just wanted to make sure that you'd see kind of how that fits into our cyclical training process or planning process. So from that standpoint, you've got some leeway or some latitude if you say, hey, we'd like to address this. It's really something that we would want to have in place that we could hand to our building principals by next spring, maybe before, maybe after spring break, so that that's part of their planning process moving forward. If we're looking to divest ourselves of any of these three goals and put a new one in, or if we're looking to change these. So I don't know, anything else to add?
So this is not the time to change these goals, because they're in place at your school level, and this.
Right.
Yeah.
And we
We're kinda
actually,
locked
we go
into
through a
this
process
goal.
where we upload our CSIPs and
Yeah.
the state takes a look at them, and so.
Yeah. So the three goals really are the one focused on reading, the one focused on math, and then the equity goal. What do we call that one? Equity?
Yes.
Culture, sorry, yeah.
Can
So-
you expand on that one?
The culture goal?
Yeah.
I can.
And could you put, and I just have to apologize, I'm locked out on my computer, could you put the district goals up on the?
Sure. Yep. So the equity goal, remember, that's the one that is focused on the environment for students in the classroom. And that's a relatively broad goal and kind of all-encompassing from that standpoint. But it's ensuring that we're recognizing the diversity of our student population along multiple axes. We're ensuring that the experience that they're having in the classroom is creating that safe, secure, nurturing environment for them to succeed in their setting, elementary, junior high, and high school level. Kingsley has, as he goes through and does his updates for you periodically throughout the year, those are actual pieces that are addressing components within that prong on the strategic plan. So whether it's the work that he's doing with Sarah Bruck and the folks at the Iowa Public Policy group there at the University of Iowa, where they're looking for feedback and input on concerns that students have about where there are gaps in our service delivery model, so we can look at closing those. Or if it's information that he's providing about work that our staff is doing, things like the Multicultural Gender Fair Committee and some of those other groups that are working on that environment issue.
Do you have questions, Phil?
Well, is in that context, is it broad enough to, is that going to capture career and technical curriculum as well?
That's not focused on content. That's focused on environment. So
Okay,
it's.
so we're focusing on math, we're focusing on reading, and a safe environment. Okay.
And Phil raises a good point, just so you know, as we went through the Leadership for Student Learning process with the board the first time around, that was an area of concern. that we talked about as a board. It's something that I hear about. I'll ask Amy and Matt if they've got anything to add. But we hear about it from specials, art, music, PE. We hear about it from non-core areas, world languages, some of those other classes that are not part of either at the secondary level, the English department or the math department. You know, the question that I get from the science folks, where are we? And so one of the things that we have that conversation about is that the board looked at a multitude of goals. And Harry was very adamant that they get down to 3 as a group as we went through it. And so we struggled to parse those down, and we had some clauses in the goals. If you remember, I know Lori and Phil were at the table. We had longer goals, and we worked at chopping those down, and we struggled to find a home for those areas that aren't reflected in these two. In the end, the decision was that math and literacy are fundamental baselines for learning those other subjects, and so that was the focus at that time. Doesn't mean that that's the only focus that's out there, but those are the ones that are in the goals.
I mean, it is interesting, and I can see why you get that input, that your strategy, because this is part of your strategic plan. These are the 3 pillars of your strategic plan that people don't see themselves in it. Like you said, if they're a special teacher, like music teacher or a career tech teacher, they're not seeing themselves in these, the pillars of the plan. We can certainly address them in specific goals, or, I mean, we can have board goals around these items if we wanted to, or there could be goals in the school plans. And maybe something to think about as we move forward. How long have we had this version of the strategic plan in place?
This is year 3.
A lot of those things are covered in the ends.
They are.
They are.
And that was part of the
Yeah.
topic of conversation, and maybe just for folks who haven't been following that, things that have been added to the ENDS policy since I've been here are fine arts and character education, which were not part of the ENDS policy prior to that. It was really the 4 core areas, and so there was an intent by the board as we went through that conversation to broaden that and to make sure that the experience that we were looking at was more holistic, which is why you get the character ed piece, which I think you see reflected in that 3rd goal on the learning environment, because you see some tie-in with that. And then again, the fine arts one was one that they were worried, especially at that point in time with some of the changes that were going on at the national level and this really reductionist move to assessment. They were worried that might, we needed to be affirmative in our support for the arts. So that's where that came from.
Yeah, we've got reading, writing, math, science, social studies, character development, and fine arts. But there again, career tech and life skills, where do they fit in?
Well, that seems like the place to do it. I mean, these feel like our, reading, I mean, you're not going to learn much history if you don't know how to read and
That's
science,
fair.
math, but I agree, we probably need some ends to cover,
I know it's kind of hard to read on here too, but that first, as you look at it, that first block is the board ends policies. And from that standpoint, the board ends policies are this wide, and what the board goals did was then look at a subset of them. So if you think about it from that standpoint, those are the first step. And then the second step is, okay, if those are our ends policies, what are the goals that we have to achieve those ends policies? What are we doing to make sure that we're meeting those expectations?
I think the other thing to consider is, I know it always feels better when it's written down locally, but there is the big CTE redesign legislation from the state of Iowa that has pulled us along with a larger partnership with Grant Wood AAA to make sure we're looking at what those new CTE areas are and how we're planning and providing strands in our system. And so that's kind of a collaborative effort across the state. We're somewhat better positioned with some of the regional centers in this area of the state compared to maybe some other parts of the state for some of that programming. But Phil and I have talked several times before, the articulation of that program is a part that's a neat area for us, and I think other districts have identified in that work about how we articulate that 7-12, not just for a back-end experience for kids. So I do think that's some front of mind work for us too that we're engaged in with that larger coalition, and it's kind of been mandated to us from the state to make sure we're doing that and part of that partnership.
I do like the idea of thinking about career trade and tech ed as an ends policy, though. Because again, that supersedes, if you will, that comes in front of the board goals. And just like with the fine arts, remember the idea was, let's not forget the fine arts, even if the federal government is, we're not going to forget them kind of thing. I think that adding the career trait and tech ed piece in the ends policy does the same thing. It helps us say, regardless of its importance at any other level, here in the district, it has a level of high importance, and then gives us the opportunity to say, what are we doing to meet that?
Is that something P&G can pick up?
Sure. But I would like it, but
Absolutely.
I don't, just make sure you send it. So that we can have it.
And when you guys brought up ends, that's what made me think of the redesign stuff, so there might be some,
Mhm.
some language we could pull from there if you're interested in that too.
Now, would a greater community participation be another thing to put in as well?
Ends are really what students should know and be able to do as they move through the
Okay.
system.
So, and then the second
Yeah.
part of that is if we want to, career in tech, I think is one thing. I think another thing that we fail to really focus on is life skills and how that might be incorporated in this as well. And that, when you look, at least when I, maybe wrongly, when I look at it and I say, okay, when we put an emphasis on career tech, we're looking at the kids that aren't going to college. But every student, whether they go to college or whether they go to career, or whether they don't choose either, need life skills. And whether we have that in there as well as a...
Sure. I think that's definitely something we could work in there.
As an ends policy. I think.
Yeah, we can even, if you think about it, I mean, if the trajectory is some type of post-secondary experience, whether it's service, whether it's apprenticeship, whether it's technical college, whether it's four-year college or university, if there's some post-secondary experience which leads to career, which leads to citizenship, that's the arc that we want them on. So to Phil's point, regardless of what post-secondary experience you have or career that you choose, you're going to be a citizen at some point, and what are the life skills that are appropriate for being a successful citizen? So how does that fit in that arc?
Actually, Steve, you'll be a citizen before any of that.
That's
You'll be
true.
voting.
Turning
Yeah.
18, you get the
Yeah.
same citizen rights as any other
Yeah.
adult,
Yeah,
with clearly not the capabilities. I mean,
yeah,
it's, and so I think that, because, or not, if you drop out and you turn 18, you're going
Yeah.
to be a citizen. And so
yeah.
what does that look like, and are the baseline that we like?
So to put a little bow on it, when I was talking earlier about how we were taking our vision and turning it into our goals, it sounds more like our vision is more guiding our ends policies than the goals are going to be teased out of that. Because a lot of the stuff we just talked about was stuff we talked about in our vision, right? This
The tiny
broad-based
little,
array of things for our kids to choose from and be active participants in their education and things like that, and having, career and technical and life skills and that stuff came up in those topics
Yeah.
that we were doing. It sounds like it's more driving those ends policies. And maybe
it's the
that's
tiny
what
little
all
print that
that
sits on
language is.
top up there. That's the
Yeah.
mission statement up there. So that's it serves as an umbrella.
I could throw out something. So within the Iowa core curriculum, we have our 4 core areas that we have standards around, reading, math, science, and social studies. But unique to Iowa is they also have 21st century skills, which are then further broken down into 5 areas: political science/civic literacy, employability skills, financial literacy, health literacy, and then technology literacy. So it might not go exactly to what Phil's talked about, but I want you to be aware that they're there and unique kind of to the Iowa core standards for each grade level.
Do those get at kind of what you're thinking of, Phil, when you think about life skills, the financial literacy, the political science, the...
Well, yeah, there was there was a tremendous article written by a student, I think it was Benton Schellsburg or school up north, was a sophomore, and was it was an editorial complaining that, she had algebra, she had all these things, but she couldn't calculate a mortgage, she didn't know, whether the best thing was to buy or lease a vehicle, and these other everyday mundane life decisions, and she felt she was being taught a lot of things that she wasn't really going to be using in life. and that she wasn't interested in sports, she wasn't interested in band, but she wanted to be productive after school. So, yeah, it does, and I'm aware of it, but I just want us not to lose the opportunity to showcase it. I mean, it's great that we have a fine arts policy, but I don't think the student that went through our schools that was gunned down in the pit mall was doing it because he hadn't been exposed to fine arts. It's because he didn't have a direction in life. And that's what I want to make sure. We're not losing the opportunity to make sure that we give the proper direction and opportunities to students when they leave our doors, that they choose the right path, or choose a path that isn't a path of destruction.
So I'm hearing P&G is going to have an assignment on a couple things to talk about CTE ends policy, and then also a life skills ends policy, but maybe kind of leveraging some of that fifth Iowa core dimension, maybe using it as some inspiration for what that ends policy would look like. Yep. When does, well, I don't even know, I don't know when P&G meets next. I'm woefully
For
behind.
the
I'm
first
like,
Tuesday of every month.
It's the 5th, I think.
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. I need like the big wall calendar.
It's just
all
every
the things.
Tuesday. Just block them off.
What's happening
No,
when?
yeah, I can't, but I...
So do you're chair of that, or did we elect a chair? Do you need any other input from people?
Well, that won't go on Tuesday's meeting, but we can have the future again.
Okay. So then, this kind of raises another question for me, and we don't have to answer this today, but, you know, the ends policy is kind of what Sean was saying a moment ago, and those seem to be a codification of our priority areas aligned to mission vision. So I get a little confused then where the strategic plan comes in.
Yeah, I'm a little, I thought, yeah. I'm a little-
So, and I get it, we need the strategic plan, believe me, I did strategy for years in my job, and we need to have that. But we've also got this other set of directives that's driving our set of prioritization. So it just feels like we've got, our structure feels kind of multi-tiered or something.
It's not quite a pyramid.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm linear, sequential,
so-
all these things, I need to get over it.
So that comes from the board's adoption, I don't remember when it is,
I have all
a
the
long
information.
time ago, of the Carver governance
Yes.
model. So that's where the ends policies come from. Those come from the Carver governance model. And we have to go back and look. To be honest with you, I know Nick Johnson was the one who brought them in, but I don't know when that happened.
Well, it's back there, and that's something we can change. We don't have to, there's a lot of people that, like the Russians say that the problem was Stalin and gross agriculture. You can look at Carver governance, and is that serving us the best?
I don't feel like we're ready to answer that question tonight.
You won't be out in an hour and a half, that's for sure.
We can certainly take these things on. I'm just trying to make sure that we've got the proper guidance in place, documented, that we feel is driving the prioritization and the behaviors and the work that we want our district to be focusing on. And so it does feel like the strategic plan goals are kind of a subset of those ends policies, and maybe that's okay, and we can work with it for now. And then as we think about, because I know you're interested in the mission statement that predated you, Steve, maybe that's something that we need to look at, and maybe we just need to kind of rethink some of these governance practices, but that feels like too much to take on tonight, and we're mid-cycle in a school year, and so shifting everything in midstream, sort of out of cycle, might not be in our best interest.
No, but not too early to start having the thought, because we'd want to have it done
You said in spring.
early, late spring, somewhere in there.
I know one thing that I feel we're missing is constantly go back, this is the institutional memory. I'd love to hear from Nick Johnson, why he introduced Carver, what was going on at that time. I have heard maybe he doesn't think we're doing it right. So what's that mean? And what's it look like when people do it right? Or we could do things differently under the Carver governance model. But right now, we probably have
The guy from Colorado.
a dozen ex-board members in the community who could provide some context.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling we're going to end up.
5 years ago?
Many
Yeah, I
of
would
those
say
are
5 or
going
6 years
wheels, not understanding where things came from, not knowing the history.
I
and
think
so
that's right, that's good.
Yeah, because my institutional memory goes back 8 years,
Right.
which seems like a long time until you get to something like this. We were just talking about it. Because we've had rapid turnover of board, about 5 years ago, they brought somebody in who was a Carver governance expert to try to train the board at that point in time, because none of them had had any training in Carver governance, and so he came in and gave them the whole primer on that, and gosh, we spent how much time doing that?
a long time.
A lot of time doing that, a lot of Sunday afternoons.
That's and then-
4 or
and then
5
you look
hours
at
at a
work,
crack.
And then you look, it's gone.
Yeah.
Not even one election later, it's just completely eradicated. And so
I have the binders.
Don't.
But yeah, here we are saying, well, let's just reinvent it all. But I mean, I think the context and the history, how did we get here? Why did we make certain choices along the way is important, so that we don't just overturn the apple cart just 'cause it feels good. We need to be thoughtful about it. But I think we should have more of this conversation around the ends policies and the strategic plan at least, and if not, a bigger conversation around whole governance.
Because you're right, from a funnel standpoint, when we did that Leadership for Student Learning exercise, it was, here's your ends policies. You're looking to come up with strategic planning goals as a district that reflect components of the ends policies. Not all of them, but reflect some of them. So you're kind of coming down that funnel. So that was part of that process. Because there were lots of ideas thrown out. I mean, we had teachers in, we had building administrators in, we had admin from here, we had the board in, and there were a lot of ideas for goals that were thrown out. And one of the filters was, do they fit in one of those buckets in the ends policies? And if they don't, we put them out in the parking lot. I still got a whole list of parking lot goals that we had at that point in time that didn't reflect one of those ends policies, and so we didn't include those.
I think it's goal setting. I don't know how folks in business do a SMART goal process, right? There's an end to it. It's part of SMART, right? And, the goals that we have, theoretically, it's never ending, right? And therefore, you're never going to be done and then be able to add new goals. And that's where we're up against, like, okay, if we want to start talking about some of these other stuff as goals, then you have to wipe the slate clean, or you have 27 goals.
Right. Which Harry was adamant he wanted
Not going to be
3.
done.
Yeah.
But
And that's where it's,
Isn't how
I
that
can't figure out how to
ends
do
and
it.
the plan should work together, right? The ends are you're constantly paying attention to everything and still working on them, but I mean, the strategic plan then can be, this is what our focus is right now. This is our prime focus. Well, these other things, it's not like we're ignoring them, we're not doing them.
no, I totally get it, but it's our prime focus right now until
When?
Well, this is a
3
good
years
one.
now we're into it, right?
If we're annually
7
improving
years.
this climate survey,
I-
we're gonna see, hopefully that climate survey gets to a point where it's okay. Like, it's better.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, and as long as it goes like that every year, and we get to the point where we say, if this many percentage, our kids feeling safe and supported in their schools, and does that, with hopefully other data, show that we've really changed our culture? To me, reading and math fit in every single bucket. Like,
Yeah.
those are kind of your fundamental things, and they may be right, or maybe the 3 R's really do fit in, like, these are important for all other skills. This is hopefully something we can change, get to the point where it's changed enough where we're like, the culture has changed. Because to me, I think this is, for me personally, being in the district, this is the thing that has stood out to me the most and verified some of experiences that I saw students having, and pointed out some other areas where I wasn't aware that we were having those problems. And those, like, we're always going to teach reading because we're always going to have new students. But hopefully we're not always changing our culture. Hopefully we change our culture and it becomes the new culture. And it's a different culture. And we get to the point where, like, we feel really good as a district. And the reason we feel really good is we're getting this student data that tells us the students aren't, pointing out all these, pretty egregious things that are happening. So that's will be my hope, that we never lose sight of our culture. But this to me is one where, it won't end, but I hope that it transforms.
Yeah, I agree that that one has the best chance of, getting to a point where you can add something else on. As you shared the last one where you had more specific numbers, I don't know if it was still district-wide or village, where it's like, this year it's 5% better or whatever. Like, that's a tangible number that you can hit and have an end point, right? If you look at our goals, it's annually increased percentage of students who are proficient. The only time that ends is when you get to 100, right? Only way you can beat that record, and that's not going to happen, right? So is the goal, and if we're going to limit ourselves to 3, we're stuck with 2 out of 3, I guess, perpetually, which I'm not going to argue that they're bad goals, because they're not, right? They're things that we need to do. I'm just trying to figure out how we can get some change, in a lot of different areas as we move forward. We're cramming stuff in ends policies and trying to come up with goals, and we kind of got little bits all over the place. Again, that's fine too. I want to put them all in places, all the things that we want to do in places that are going to drive us to then attain them.
That's right.
Wherever they end up on this pretty little colored sheet doesn't really matter to me all that much, as long as we find some way that we're going to address them and focus on them.
Well, I think the achievement gap is probably the clearest target. And again, it's a big one, there's now if you guys have the study that shows the secret, let me see it, because we're talking about 30 years, and we're talking about unpacking things that probably don't have much to do with the curriculum that you're teaching, and maybe do have something to do with the people who are teaching, but it's a lot of different stuff, and you can tease out some of that data on test scores and show that it's not just poverty, but race, absent poverty has, well, what's going on there? Is it the test? Is it there's so much going on there. I think if we can close those gaps in any significant way, then we're on to something. But if we're not, what I don't want to do is keep doing the same stuff people have been doing for 30 years, and that has not touched this, and that still lands us in the same spot. My personal opinion still is it's got a lot more to do with this piece, the culture piece, than what test we give and when we give it and all of that. I think it has a lot more to do with the systemic issues that this is why it's nationwide, this is why we're not new. But if we can figure it out, something out here, that would be a cool way and maybe that won't happen, Sean. Definitely pie in the sky here, for sure.
Right on, that's what I've kind of thought though too, is if you can get numbers to move there, you'll get numbers to move in. Your achievement, but if we can't get them to move there, it's going to be pretty hard to move on that achievement.
That's the
piece.
thing, it's gonna, and this is the part that we can change this. We can change our culture. As hard as that is, it's possible. We cannot change poverty in America. We cannot change our history. We cannot change these things that are massive. We can't change the economy. But the way that our teachers interact with our students, we can change. And we have to, right? Because I know that probably 100% of the teachers who made a kid feel bad didn't want it. And so how then do we take that good intent and match it with the impact it's having and define that and unpack that? Sorry.
No, that's good. So P&G's got some items around ends. We're saying we've got a broad set of ends policies. Some of those are driving our strategic goals, but we've got all sorts of operational steady state activities that are in support of ends policies. So they're kind of macro strategies. The strategic goals are a subset. And then my next question is, the board goals that we're going to be talking about, are the board goals aligned to the strategic goals? Are they aligned to the ends policies? Are there other things that we want to throw into the mix?
So the
Just
board
from an alignment
goals
standpoint.
were a separate standalone board body
Kind of how we're going to
issues.
spend our time.
Yeah.
I see.
So those were not necessary, and to give you just a little bit of history before it, there didn't used to be district goals. So the board had goals, but sometimes the board adopted their how we're going to do our work thing, and they sat in place of district goals, which didn't make any sense because it was, as a board, we're going to continue to learn and grow, and here's how we're going to do it.
Right.
I couldn't take that out to the building staff and say, Sean, do something with this. If they look at it and say, it's all about the board, what am I supposed to do with this? So we had these board goals that were adopted. We didn't really have district goals. Then we adopted both side by side, and then so we talked about goal proliferation. I mean, we had a whole row of them. So they went back and said, we're going to adopt board goals, but it's very specific to the behavior of our body as a unit.
Okay.
So that's really what those
All
are.
right,
That's
so they
where
don't fit in that
No.
kind of alignment.
They don't have to.
Yeah, that's-
I mean, they should probably be related, but.
That's for things like professional development of the board. Doesn't necessarily fit in that line of stuff, but they decided
But
that
it
was something.
contributes to
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, shouldn't be, out of sync, but doesn't have to be tightly aligned. So that helps me. So, is there more conversation on these district goals? And anything we can do? I think that was a good conversation, and we've got some action items.
Just one last,
and
there's
policies.
somewhere, I was trying to find it, I can't find it, I'm tired. But each one of those goals has like another sort of blown up page,
Yes.
some subset stuff in it. And I'm thinking, as we talk about culture being an important thing, we go back to the vision and some of the wording, again, words I think are a big deal. Talk about, all students involved in the planning of their future, and then the engagement piece with the community and stuff. And I'm wondering if that's kind of the sub-broken out part of the culture goal is where we can kind of look at the wording in there, maybe make sure that that stuff's counting some of those things we've been talking about.
Well, especially as
That's the place to reword it.
Yeah, especially as we move to the spring, because that's that fine tuning calibration that as a board you say, that looks good, but from a course correction standpoint, we want to move over here. Because then we use that to drive what's happening at the building level, and then that drives what's happening at the classroom level.
And I think even like at their last board, I think the students against hate and discrimination stuff that they're talking about, I think that's kind of a place to look to make sure that we've got words in there that's kind of aligning with some of those things they're asking for.
No, I think that's good.
'Cause at some point, you've got to have more than a sentence in it.
It does, it proliferates out. So the spring timeframe is when we can take a look at these three goals and the more detail under there to make sure they're still encompassing what we've captured from a vision perspective. And that's the spring.
When do we get that public policy? When does that usually come out? The report, the climate survey? The student brings.
Yeah.
End of the year.
Yeah.
Will that be in the right time to influence?
Well, we'll have, so we've got cumulative
We're
data.
going to continue to need it as a goal. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like it's going to go away based on, I mean, the goal will need, I'm sorry, Steve.
Right, no, yeah, you're right, and we've got some trend line data now, so we can see where it's going. It may be an opportunity as we're moving in that direction to actually spend some time as a board with Sarah from the University of Iowa, with Kingsley in here, with members of the MCGF committee. I mean, there's a bunch of different groups that we may want to have come in and we may want to talk to, so that when, as Sean said, is when we dig into the next set of pages that are in there, the operational part of the plan, how we as an administrative team take what you've said and say, how do we do this? So we've got how do we do it? So if this is your goal, okay, these are the things we're going to do, this is the timeline, here's who's going to do it, here's when it's accountable. So when we operationalize it, that's where there's an opportunity for you to get in and say, course correction needed based on input from. And then there's that opportunity for us to then change what happens as part of the district goals and the building goals.
I think it's a great idea. I think I'd love to see if we could.
And I'd say do that in the winter. So it
February.
didn't feel like winter out right now, but do it in the winter so that when we get to the spring, we've met with those groups, we've had those conversations, we've had the time to think about it.
And is that something Equity Committee works on too? Is
Yeah, I
that
was
the kind of
wondering
stuff
about
they're
that.
doing too?
It could very well be, absolutely.
Because it'd be nice if we, there's a lot of things going on and they're going to, but if we can, if everybody's focusing the more narrow we can get our focus, we might have a better impact. Not to leave anything out, but if just the more people who are working towards the same, this goal, our strategic plan goal, and get more heads in the room, I think is great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the equity thing, because the equity plan has got some of that community
Mhm.
support stuff baked into
Yep.
it too. And so when we do have different groups working on pieces of this, so February-ish, we would want to, first we need to solidify what groups we want to chat with, but then make sure we get them scheduled as a, one big session with all kinds of people with an agenda that we've got established. But it's good to have that time for everyone to figure out what the structure is of those sessions look like. That's good.
I have a question for Matt and Amy. So when you consider what you have to submit to the state and the federal government as far as their ends, that they're, whatever endpoint they have written in their policy, do these goals align well with that? Are there other things that you're being asked to do that we should recognize in this process?
That's a good question. I would say that the state has definitely changed over the process for CSIP information. It used to be completely confusing, and now they've aligned more so to FAST and the healthy indicators. We talked a little bit last time about differentiated accountability that is not the flower. So the focus is much more narrowed, and right now we're only writing an annual achievement goal around reading or literacy.
Okay.
And so, like Steve said, we've chosen to operationalize that. What do we want to set a district goal at for literacy at the elementary level? And then beyond that, having everybody pulling in the same direction, we said, okay, we also want to look at our subgroups. Who are our lowest performing subgroups? And we just said, we're going to set it at 3% for all students, K-6. But we want to take our lowest performing subgroups, that means our Hispanic kiddos and our Black and African American kiddos, and we doubled that rate and said 6%. So hopefully we'll close that achievement gap with our lowest performing groups. Interestingly enough, happened to be at a DE meeting in September when we were struggling. Do we set it at what we saw the growth at last year and expect the same because we're excited about what we saw? Do we go a little bit above? What's that point where we should set something at? When you think about SMART goal for just the end of this year, and we were thinking about 3%. Well, lo and behold, I read something in, it was the September DE school year update that talked about just kind of like at the very bottom that the state had set a goal around 3%. And I happened to talk to C Director Tilley at this meeting I was at. I said, why did you pick 3%? Interestingly enough, that's what we're looking at as well. And he said, well, done a lot of research, looked around the nation, looked at some foreign countries, and he said, well, he said you can see some pretty good jumps. He's like, but the districts that have been able to sustain improvement efforts over time, you're seeing 2, 3, 4% growth each year. So just so happened it worked out. I was saying to Matt the other day and Diane Schumacher this morning, it would be so nice, and I know we're about local control too, but it'd be so nice if the AEAs would have adopted that goal and then all districts would adopt that goal. Think if everybody in the whole state was pulling towards that 3%. So anyway, we looked at the CSIP and said, or strategic plan and said, how are we going to operationalize that? And this is the first year we've done it and really expected everybody to write a SMART goal around the same even assessment. So in years past, they might have been able to pick Dibbles or Iowa assessment or whatever, but we said, you know what, we're going to throw all our eggs in one basket and we're going to go for this. So we'll see how it works out. We're super excited about the work that we're doing. And then we just don't leave them to their own devices, We have regular monthly meetings where we're working on each of these areas that we have listed in the building C stuff. So
maybe 3% increase is something we should put on our legislative priorities or something.
Let's start high.
Any other comments on the strategic plan district goals? That was a good conversation. So with that, we'll shift into board goals and action plans. And thank you for the clarification. This is our own piece of work trying to govern what we're trying to accomplish. We had a couple artifacts, 2 versions of goals from last school year. And I thought one thing we could do is just start with the latest version, the one that was, which one is that? The one that's dated 3.5, and just since that's the latest version, is there anything on here that's just from first blush that we would want to take off? I mean, clearly the bond is passed, so that no longer needs to be a board goal to pass the bond.
Just to be clear, the two documents are really the same document. The second one is just when we had our second board retreat.
Got it.
We covered what we had.
I was gonna say, it's
You just
update.
added updates, so the
Yeah.
goals didn't actually change, you just provided updates.
The goals and the action, but I don't think changed, but the status update is what we had.
Okay, all right, thank you. So, you know, we certainly can take a look at these and maybe just start from the top and work our way down and see if they're still relevant from a goal perspective. As I've looked at this, there's a couple things that I would throw out for consideration as potential goals, but I'm sure you all have some ideas as well. And I mean, Harry probably wouldn't be happy that we already have 7 and we need to maybe add more, but, from the first one, supporting the strategic plan, those district goals, is this something you feel like is a goal that we want the board to continue to focus on?
I feel like that's something that's inherent in what we do. I don't personally feel like I need to have it written down to do it. I think by us having these conversations and talking about goal setting, we're talking about how these things all relate to the strategic plan. I'm not opposed to it being there, but I also think it's kind of, it's something we're doing already. So it's kind of like an easy win. Yeah, we're doing that. Maybe put some more challenging things on that we're not already doing.
And we may want to review those actions if we keep this as a board goal. Some of those actions may not be, we may have done some of these already, like make them more accessible on the website, that might be done.
One of the pieces on there, I agree some of the stuff, yeah, it's inherent to being part of the board, with the exception of item number 3, continue to focus on the equity plan. I think that's something that, as a board, as far as our support for the strategic plan, that may be something we want to continue to see that line constantly there, because I'm not sure if we're at a place where we can say, oh yeah, we're already doing that by focusing on diverse teacher recruitment, disproportionality, and overall climate. It's just not there. So as a board, personally, I would like to continue to see that spelled out.
It is carried over again, right below that, in the equity plan, the same exact language there. So it's,
Because I mean, that's an
twice
issue
saying,
that
hey, this is important.
exactly. It's an important piece that, as a board, we should want to continue to have our focus there, especially since this was a part of the action plan in status update, and I think there's still quite a bit of work to do. Not saying that work wasn't accomplished, but it's something that as a whole board we should continue to strive for.
I guess from a conversation we just had in the previous 20 minutes or however long it was, I would suggest keeping the support of the strategic plan there, but maybe look at some language of, making sure that it's the right strategic plan as we move forward. Because that's what we're talking about. Is that is this the stuff, and making sure that we're staying on top of it. I mean, holds us accountable to doing it.
I mean, there's stuff we completed, so obviously it takes stuff out.
Right.
Yeah, from an action standpoint, but I actually like having it overt too, because that's why we exist, right? Is to make sure that we're focusing on priorities and the strategy and moving the district forward from a governance perspective and a policy perspective. I do like this notion of updates on progress, of the barriers, or the things that we can be doing as a board to help overcome some of those. Metrics are always a big deal. So it might be, it's sort of why we exist, but it might be useful just to continue to restate it as we want to make sure that we focus and prioritize our time and energy. It really does need to be focused on the strategy, the district goals. And
Probably passing the goal.
I think we can take good one.
Yeah, that one can go in the support of the strategic plan up the top, investigate ways to increase parental participation and engagement. And of course, that sound like a broken record, that's a big one for me. And for our increasing opportunities for tech curriculum, increasing utilization of Career Regional Center. I'd also like us to have a goal to increase our career tech opportunities and curriculum at the building level. That we don't put it all out on the regional center, because we have seen barriers to transportation cutting the numbers of those participating. And I'd like to see that we increase it at the building level. And
It's almost like you take that one line and make it two separate sentences.
exactly, right, exactly. And I'd also like to see us, as a board, make it as a goal to bring back the home building program.
I think that's a bigger discussion than just putting it out as a goal.
Well, it is, but that's something that's attainable.
But yeah, so it's bringing Japanese back to the district, but what I'm saying
Maybe
is
have
that's.
Japanese here before?
Yeah, I took it for a year and a half in high school.
Really? Wow, that's amazing.
But what I'm saying is I think it may be a goal to have, but to be like a very focused goal on our goal list.
And is that a
Have
goal of the board or
conversation.
is it a goal of the district to implement that? I'm trying to parse sort of what our job is from ends policies to strategy to our governance to programming that gets implemented in the buildings. I mean, I'm just trying to parse what a board goal is.
Well, I think if our board goal is that, like I said, take that big two-sided sentences, take Kirkwood as its own thing, and our board goal has greater focus on career opportunities and technical curriculum,
That encompasses.
that counts that, and
Got
then
it.
find where that tiers down into a specific place where you can put it.
Okay.
I think it does, it is valuable to have it listed because it requires administrative time. It requires board time to investigate, to learn about the budget impacts of these things. If it's a goal that we have, we want to spend time on it. And this is about how we're spending our time. So if it's not listed here, we're probably not going to spend time on it.
Are you
Make sense?
talking about that
What's that?
specific program?
I'm not saying that specifically, but,
Well,
but, I mean, it could be something more broad, like investigate such and such. You know, it doesn't, not, I mean, we can say bring it back, but that's a yes or a no. That's a process, I think, that you get to, that decision. Investigating takes time. We hear from, you know, the administrators on how that fits with the curriculum that we already have. We hear from the business office about how that fits budget-wise. There's a lot of pieces to it.
And, well, I think one thing that can get at that, Bill, when you said increasing the opportunities in the building, like, to me, that, because that increases the opportunity. If it is closer to you, more people will participate. And then how that's done, if it's home building or if it's something else, you know, I think that would be separate from, so that we're not just focused on Kirkwood, so that we're also saying, let's get this in our buildings, that we want to see that. Because, and some of what we're doing, I mean, even the kitchen stuff at West, and that is a very technical facility in a building. And I think I'm certainly in favor of doing more of that in buildings. And I don't know if that helps include the goal, make sure we're focused on it, make sure we're focused on it in the buildings, and then that home building would be one way, maybe two. And that's not in the building.
Well, it's something I've tried as a board member of town goals to put that in. And we're also working on FFA and other curriculum and things like that. So, yeah, if it can be, I don't know if we put it in parentheses, following, increasing career technical at the building level, such as, I don't think it's wrong to, myself personally, to have it there that it's staring us in the eye.
Well, I'm just saying if we're gonna get that specific on that course, then, you know, there's other things that I think.
Sure.
Probably go down the line and we would have three or four
I
things.
don't dispute it at all, but every time I look through this thing, I see a whole bunch of AP courses that the state doesn't require us to do, but we do.
I'm not
Yeah.
debating the fact that, I'm just saying that specific class to be a goal is just, I think, not
Well,
possible.
and I recognize what you're saying there, that maybe that, but I want it to be present in our minds, because too often we go past this and we get to there, and it's not until next year, this time, oh yeah, we did talk about that.
Maybe we need a whole separate goal around CTE and list some specific actions around that, where we could say, school or building level activities, maybe not getting to the course level, but calling it out that we have to have a focus, this board wants to have a focus on CTE, and here are some of the actions we're going to take against that.
And it does feel like that would align with what Matt was saying, that he's getting from, is it the state level?
Yeah.
Yeah.
CTE redesign.
So that would fit with something they're already working on, and we want to focus to support that work as well.
Yeah, I would agree with Paul on not putting specific classes into our board goals. That's a weird thing. Putting a whole bunch of stuff about career technical stuff on the line of supporting the equity plan as the header also seems weird.
Yeah.
I see the line in there. Well, I get why it's there, because we want equitable learning opportunities for all of our kids, and some of those are career technical curriculum and some are not, right? Like that's why it's there. Drilling down too far on that in this venue seems strange to me. I do like adding the words in our buildings and making those two separate lines. Take Kirkwood's its own thing, opportunities in our buildings as a separate thing.
Maybe
I
we
think is
could
okay.
have a line that's for 21st century learning skills. Since it's what the state has, it would include career technical, like a whole nother goal line that.
Yeah,
we
just
can
take
add.
out like transforming our learning environment past the geo round. You like that one because we did it.
Yeah.
And then you just add in what you said. That's just a separate
21st century learning,
board goal.
and underneath
Transform
that
our
would be
learning environment.
CTE.
It just changed the
Life
subtitle.
skills, that would include the life
Yeah,
skills piece,
okay,
that would include
yeah.
the civics piece, which clearly our entire country needs giant civics lessons. It's right there, bottom of our.
So that's good. So we're going
Already
to
character ed.
transform our learning environment and focus on CTE, life skills. I mean, it's this those two ends policies that we were talking about, right?
And that's where we're going to have the building level
Yeah.
line
Yeah.
as well.
Line,
We've got
Yeah.
that
I will say that I'm looking at the equity plan here, and it doesn't specifically have an objective related to career and tech. So the title of this section or this category is support the equity plan. That's not in it.
Yeah, I wondered.
I agree.
Thank you for pulling that up. I had the equity plan memorized this summer during the campaign. It's great that I need to remind myself of it, but I remember there's community engagement, there's recruiting teachers of color, there's, what were some of the other ones in there?
Let's see, improve educational experiences through culturally inclusive and responsive school environments and classroom instruction. Let's see. Okay, let me get more
Well,
detail here. Anyway,
yeah, so-
reduce disproportionality and, those kinds of things. It's more broad, I think. And what you're talking about is a specific category. I would be
I
okay
think
with
it
it.
warrants its own category.
That's what I was going to say. I
I
think
do.
it would fit to be its own category,
Okay.
my personal opinion.
Go for that as well.
And it could include some of
That's
these
what
other
I'm
things.
asking,
Right.
right? We include the
Yeah,
life skills.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I think we should.
not
we
just
wanna-
career and tech, but yeah.
Do we want to just broaden it to 21st century learning skills, or? is that what
That
we-
encompasses what Matt was speaking
Mhm.
on,
Mhm.
that because it focused on CTE as well as.
The lines of the state.
Yeah.
It's not something that I think districts have, haven't done anything.
So we're going to keep the alignment to the strategic plan. We might need to work on what the actions are. We're going to keep supporting the equity plan. We need to keep that front and center. We're going to transform our learning environment past GeoBond, transform our learning environment, incorporate 21st learning skills or whatever the language is, and reference CTE, life skills, etc. What about special ed? That seems to be such a big focus in the district. I feel like we need to keep something called out specifically.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Real, yes.
And so what about extending and reviewing the FMP? And so I don't know that we need, right now the discussion's around acceleration, or since the bond is passed, it's around delivering on the FMP.
When we develop a
Maybe.
10-year FMP, I think that's probably good that we keep I thought that was a good idea. I think we should keep, what's the next?
What's the
Right,
backlog of
because
stuff?
everything wasn't covered, as we
And it
all
won't be,
know.
'cause
I
we're gonna
know,
keep
but
growing, so we
there's
have to
some
always-
significant
We're also-
needs still present
Yeah.
that I think we have to have on the table as our conversation progress. I know some of us talked about, oh, when a bond passes, no more facility talks. I don't think that's realistic. As we continue to grow as a district, our needs change. So there has to be some type of conversation surrounding our facilities because our needs continue to change, aren't always met. I mean, we can name a couple of buildings that their needs aren't going to be met with the passage of the bond or with the acceleration. That, for me, I think that's still really important to have.
I agree.
So maybe broaden it to not FMP in the first column, but, you know, FMP can be an action that we're doing to review the FMP, but there's more to it than just the FMP.
Right.
I think the facility master plan, I think you're just getting stuck on that 10-year. I think that there's always got to be a facility master plan.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
rolling
it's-
plan,
It's a
honestly.
never-ending process.
Yeah.
It's never completed. It slows down, but it's
Like one part of
never
this
ending.
is 10-year section.
Yeah, exactly,
And we
right.
should be adding on to it regularly.
That's right.
Right.
I mean,
Each year,
just
or each time you review it.
every time you I mean, you know, that it's, again, I think this is the way with boundaries, this is an awe, I think we're just such a dynamic community, we're changing so fast, we can never, ever stop that conversation. It's just
Right.
constantly gonna happen.
So
And-
would it be fair to change the heading there to like reviewing district-wide facility needs or something like that, and then one of your actions is adding on to the facilities master plan, or, you know, having the rolling review, and then also, you know, boundaries can be part of that, and, you know, those things you said are sort of those things you kind of all have to look at to just feed the general needs of the facilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's helpful to, if we, just from if we call it an FMP, just because that's outside. People have it, it's on their tongues, they know what it means. And then the FMP is just something that's continuing to change. That way we're not renaming the
Right.
plan, or every time now it's the 20, the
No.
2, whatever, right? And
mean,
people are like,
because-
well, what's that? If you say, no, it's the FMP, well, I thought that was over. No, the FMP just keeps going. There's no end to the FMP until our district stops growing. And even then, we gotta fix stuff.
And I think the way some of the diagrams have been articulated, that some of the projects are funded with SAVES. Now we've got a batch that are gonna be funded with the GEO bond, and then we can start adding to the out years and identifying what some of those priorities are. We don't know what the funding is yet for those future things, but we can start putting them on that map, right? And that might help differentiate between current FMP, GEO bond funded stuff versus future stuff.
Because as we educate the public, which, part of our job, one, is just getting educated on stuff ourselves to understand it. But as we kind of, like the process of passing the bond, a lot of that was educating the public about funding sources. Well, it's going to come up again. We're going to need another bond at some point. And if we already have enough people in the community who are sort of understand the lingo, and then, that's just less work we have to do later, more people who really understand the process, because it is complicated. But right now in our community, we probably have more people than ever before who understand SAVE, PEPAL, and GOBOND. And so that, as much as we can hold on to that, just keep that education rolling for ourselves as well as the general public, that's going to make those conversations a lot easier down the road.
There could actually be an action somehow, people
I-
gain public awareness
Of funding and how it's going, and hey, we might
Public
ask for
input
another
on
bond
what
in
the needs are.
2025.
So let me ask a question, because maybe it was Sean, or maybe it was Paul, sorry, around boundaries? Who was it that raised boundaries?
Well-
Because that could be a component of FMP.
Well, I think it is. I
Yes.
think you can't talk about your facilities needs without at least considering what your boundaries are, right? I mean, if we start having shifting populations, does it make sense to change the boundaries, or does it make sense to add on to a school that now has more kids, right? Like,
Yeah.
those two things are interwoven.
And we know we've got
Tightly.
boundary work this year, so adding that as an action under sort of this master planning, facilities master planning activity feels like it makes sense to me. That was actually one that I wondered if we needed to add to specifically to our goals for this year. But I like adding under the master
Yeah, we
planning.
review boundaries with facilities, and
Yeah,
that's,
they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And along that point, this a little, I'm sorry if it's taken us a little bit off that course, but in the special ed department and in the facilities department, I think we need something to make sure that we have, for special ed, facilities that are adequate for their needs. So if we get into a discussion on removing seclusion boxes, that requires space. Now, does that go in our special ed? Do we make that a special ed goal there? Or is it something that we put into our facilities master plan discussion? Or maybe both?
We had
And along those lines too, equitable play surfaces. I think a discussion on a goal for us and going forward is that we have discussions well in advance on playgrounds as to ensure that all students can utilize them equally.
So that's a good action under the F&P goal.
Well, I leave it, you know, I think it's important that we state it. And on the special ed thing, I mean, I think we need to put something in there that if the district decision is to remove these, that it's a recognition that we still will have needs, and those needs will have to be met.
That's good. So that's good. The F&P one, I'll do some work in terms of what those action items, and this is what I'm thinking, we're gathering input. If y'all think of anything after this, send it to me by email. I'll try to collate it into a plan for review by the group, just to kind of give you something to react to based on this conversation. There's another one that I was wondering if we needed to add. Actually, I have like 3 more that I thought maybe would be a discussion of potentially adding a goal. And one is around developing a plan to balance our elementary school populations. And I'm not being prescriptive in what the solution is. I'm just saying, what's our plan for that? We've talked an awful lot. We did at the last work session around the elementary schools in the southeast side of town, and ours, or are there ideas around how to balance? There's all kinds of things that have been discussed. And I'm not suggesting that we would actually implement that plan this year, because we're already halfway in practically, but what do we want to do about that as a district? And I feel like it's a very hot topic, and I feel like the board should spend some time on that this year. So I'm just throwing it open for input and reaction.
I would agree with that, because one thing we had, I believe, on our 2015 goals that don't show up here is I had wanted a discussion on year-round school. And that was something that we did accomplish. We got some information on it, which is why it didn't show up in 2016 goals. But what's that?
It's on there. It's the last item in support equity plan.
Support an equity plan. Continues the nudges or alternative.
Alternative. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So
there you go. Well, so
okay.
that's,
Yeah. So but I like making it a separate category because each of those things will take. Again, this is a map of how we're going to spend our time, and if we're going to spend a significant amount of time on that, then I think we should include it as a specific category.
And frankly, that question and that situation is going to help us with all the other stuff. It's going to help us with climate and reading and math. And again, we don't live in Detroit. We don't have like miles of impoverished neighborhoods. Like, that's not even a reality, right? Like, we can do some things in our community that could be very different and hopefully really innovative and get people excited to really shift some of this. But, I just think hopefully we're all like super uncomfortable that we have like 15% FRL and 75% FRL in like a mile from another. If it was 20 miles and the whole area around you is, but we don't even live in that community. And it's, I think, so, and there's not one answer. There's not one answer for that we can just do all the time. We're going to have to have different solutions and ideas, and we're going to have to get creative and maybe think of some, hopefully we don't have to reinvent wheels. Hopefully we get models of things that have worked. But I think we have to throw everything on the table and say, if the directive is schools are at 50, show me the plan that gets us there, and then let's start talking about how we move that around. But I got to see the first plan that shows every school within this range. And then how do we realistically get there, and then what are our obstacles, and maybe there are obstacles we can't overcome. Obviously, budget is always going to play a role. But I think we have to keep our eye on that ball. And I didn't hear in the campaign one objection. Nobody, not a single person said, that's a bad idea. I'm sure they will when we talk about their school. I'm sure they're going to say this is a terrible idea. I saw it in 2009, when people just lost their mind. And frankly, it was the beginning of me opening my eyes a little bit about the community I live in, which is fine, right? We're all humans, and change is hard. But the truth is, like right now, we have kids and teachers who are teaching and learning in vastly inequitable circumstances. So teachers with mental health problems because of their job, and teachers who have a pretty typical teaching job. That's hard enough the way it is, not easy ever, but it's way too disparate. And we're too small of a community, and too, hopefully, I know people will push back, but I think, when we talk to those community leaders, when we go to the previous board members, and we get some leadership from them to say, hey, we started this, we want to keep it going, I think that's going to help us get the buy-in from the community. And then we anticipate where the loudest voices are going to come from, and do some upfront work there with leaders in those communities to say, how do we have this conversation? Because it's an uncomfortable conversation. And it's going to be. And we should, but we have to have it. We have to keep pushing. And I think there's some opportunity. Year-round school is something. I haven't talked to too many people who wouldn't be on a lottery list for that in a heartbeat. Teachers and students. I've seen communities where they've adopted to great fighting, and then now every district around them isn't, because they're like, oh wait, this actually makes more sense than summer's off. Like, there's no educational reason for that whole summer off. And frankly, as a special ed teacher, what's the biggest problem you have is August and September. Seeing that growth that you saw in May, gone in September, and just starting over again. And with special ed especially, that's a huge thing to overcome. And so I just think some of these ideas, and I don't know how we get there, but I guess it's like you guys get paid, and you just say, hey.
We spend time on it, is how we do it.
We do spend time, absolutely, you're right. And I'm not diminishing any effort.
You have a history of it, 2013, 14,
We started gathering research, so we've got stuff, we can get that updated.
We can pick up from there and
Yep.
just take it to the next step.
Pairing of schools, magnet schools, I know there's a survey on that, the parent choice thing kind of fits in the magnet piece, and there's a lot of different ideas besides busing kids, there's a lot of different approaches to this, so.
There's a lot of drivers for it too, though. We pretty eloquently discussed, the FRL levels and special education needs, but even thinking back to the dire picture that Craig presented at the last work session of we're going to have no money here before too long, right? And we're growing faster than our money's coming in. And if the 84% is where you find efficiencies, you have to.
Compared schools have efficiencies.
Something.
Staffing
right?
efficiencies. We don't
For our
wanna-
small schools, yeah.
Not
For our
give
small
raises, and we don't
schools,
want to firing people,
needs.
right? We want to look at other things. that
You're
allow us
never
to
gonna have to
keep
fire.
going.
Attrition
Yeah,
will be enough.
but we already have too many kids in classes to say that attrition's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But if we can take some efficiencies in some smaller buildings, if we can find staff costs there, that's, because
There's a lot of
right.
schools
In
to
2
do.
years, we're not gonna be all like, oh, just pass the bond, it's good. It's gonna be like, oh, wow, where's our unspent balance going? And it's really getting close to zero, and that doesn't feel good. And oh, now we have to borrow from NICECAP. Oh, wait, whoa. Again, state funding's out of control.
So this feels like a goal that we would want to add around developing a plan for balancing elementaries.
I don't know if maybe it's actions that you put in under the last category of facilities
Under
type
FNP.
needs,
Oh, under
right?
FNP.
Or maybe we could call it something like FNP boundaries or something that.
Well, that's what I'm saying, like, just
Broaden
facilities
that.
needs or
Broaden
something,
it.
so
Okay,
that's
all
very
right.
broad-based and have it as
All
an
right,
action.
and so include that as an action under the, whatever we were calling the
Semantics to that
FMP.
point.
Because it really is a facilities question, right? Like year-round school, staffing doesn't change. I mean, you got to change, you don't change the days you work, right? But you might have to change when the building is and
Okay.
that kind of stuff.
So we'll cover it that way. Any other comments on that one? The other one, sorry, I keep adding to the list. The other one that I was wondering if we would want to add, since this is board goals, do we want a goal around board development? And so what I mean by that is, in a minute we'll be talking about the idea of doing a needs self-assessment. That's part of our, actually, a board governance policy that we have, is that we're regularly going to review our performance and continuously improve. There's, Paul just got the Better Boardsman Award through IASB. Is that something that we would want board members to aspire to, those kinds of, I don't know if it's a certificate or something? You know, and it's also about modeling certain behaviors at the board level that we would want, you know, our students and community members to see. And it could be learning opportunities, it could be, you know, I don't know if we would ever want to do anything like this, but as a board, go through something like implicit bias training. We've talked about wanting our teachers to have those kinds of opportunities and learning experiences. Wouldn't it be cool if we did something like that and learned from it and could use it in our work and our community and here? And so,
One eyebrow up until you said that very specific example, because that is something I was like, yeah, if we're going to ask everybody under the
so
sun to do
it's for
it,
me,
why shouldn't
board
we have to do
development.
it
It's
as well?
board
Right.
development. How
Yeah,
to
it'd be good for us.
function.
Now,
how
those
to-
are goals we set for our staff surrounding professional development. So, I mean, for me, that's how I looked at it more, for us to be able to effectively serve our district and community. I think it's a realistic goal to have as a board, that we're working on improving ourselves and understanding how our role works. And I don't know if you saw the response when you mentioned the one implicit bias training for the board. It was at least 3 of us nodding our head like, oh, yeah.
Well, I think it
I mean,
helps
I
set
think
our
it would be-
expectations of what that means for staff,
Absolutely.
right? Like, I could say, oh, if they all take it, it's going to fix everything, right? Because I have this expectation of what that is. I don't
We
think
kind of have,
do,
I
but
feel like we have
going
to
through
walk
it-
the talk, is my feeling as a
And our
board.
last board did some of this work in an education committee meeting, so, I mean, I think,
Yeah.
again, we can pick up from where we've started, and it doesn't have to be, you know, 3 meetings long. It can be
No.
something that we do. At that point, we had the equity committee come in and conduct the work for us, whatever.
Maybe it's something like, so that circle training, right?
Mhm.
Which I love, but I can't do 3 days. I just can't.
And
I
yeah,
just-
right,
But can you
exactly.
give me I mean, I don't want just a PowerPoint, but I want enough so I know what we're asking staff to do, and then I can evaluate it. Well, does this work?
Go through a demo, how does it feel?
Yeah, yeah, it could be something. we could do
What
it
types of
in
scenarios do you use it in? How does it work as you process through it? Who's trained in it?
I mean, I'm thinking CPI, if anybody wants to practice some holds, get security guys at you to come in and take
Again,
these
it's
guys out.
walking the talk. I think it's really important for us to learn and have those experiences so that we understand better. Yeah.
Some of that's covered in our governance style policy, Level 3, and it says in there that we will, board development will include ongoing education of members in the support governance process and periodic board discussions and evaluation of the process to ensure continued improvement.
So,
So we could be there and pulled out, so we could
Yeah,
have
so
constant.
let me ask you that, Paul, because so if we have these ends, but this is what we're looking at, right, this cheat sheet. So how do we, and then we're not going to put everything in P&G on our cheat sheet, but how do we make sure that's, or how did the board make sure that would happen, you know, from P&G? Because my guess is at P&G, mostly it's going to be us on P&G who know those, we're gonna get to know those really well, and maybe everybody else is kind
Well,
of,
I hope everyone would know the board policies to some level.
to some level, but maybe not to that detail.
But
to
actually,
say,
reading
like,
those
I can
policies
decide
is
later
what,
for
for me,
It's the accountability piece that I think when you add it to this list, then you're accountable to the list. Because it's something that we want to do, and it's an ends policy, of course. But in 6 months, will we say, did we do that if it's not on the list?
And it could be, if it's a goal that we have, kind of like supporting the strategic plan, is kind of one of these things that we should be doing. But so what are the specific activities and actions we're going to take this specific year? You know, what training, learning opportunities, circle, implicit bias, whatever.
Alice.
We just call it out each year. I'm sorry?
Alice, the
Yeah.
active shooter thing.
So what are the things that we think are priorities for this year? So it is, yes, it's an ends policy, but what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, maybe have it in there, and I would say maybe your actions are, you still have to be somewhat vague, right?
Charging them.
We could go back and saying we need to put specific things in there, but I think maybe you have separate lines as, individual-based, learning as well as team-based
Yeah,
learning. 'Cause I
it's
think they're both
fantastic.
important, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking back, because we just did the convention in Des Moines, some of us did, and some people just aren't able with their jobs, right? So you can't say, well, you're a failure because you didn't go to it, right? You didn't take these classes, so you didn't get a boardsmanship award kind of thing, right? Like, that's not fair. But it's also for me, that was very self-motivated. Like, I enjoyed that a lot myself, but I wouldn't expect everybody to enjoy that kind of thing. But there are things each individual, I think, can find to educate themselves in their job. And then some of those group activities, I think, are important too. They should be kind of separate things. We hold ourselves accountable for our individual learning. And then
Yeah.
as a group, we're going to hold our board accountable.
Especially for some of the, like the culture and climate, we have to know what it means. If we're asking somebody to change, well, what does it mean for me? How do I reflect on that? How do I not be that person who is making the kid feel bad? Or, that's, because those are a little, like school finance, you can learn about that and it's a thing, but changing the culture, takes a little more work.
Can I insinuate myself into this conversation?
Yes,
Yeah.
please, of course.
The only thing I would add too is I think it would be helpful for the group to even just look at educating yourself on just basic boardsmanship too. What your job is, what your job's not. I think some of the frustrations that have happened over the years too have been people not understanding what their role is as a member of a board. And I think there's some really good things that IASB puts out in a handbook that have sections, and sometimes for your own learning you spend 5 or 10 minutes at a board meeting just covering a certain aspect of what it means to be a member of a board, or that's part of your retreat. But there's really good material just about that I think helps a group model and function much more cohesively. It still allows for the conversations to happen and people to share their opinions, but where that goes from there, I think, communication, what's a open meeting versus closed meeting, and communication that happens within and outside, just all those board basics, I think would be really helpful, especially for as new as this group is, as a team.
And Jane, do they, or Paul, or you guys who've done this, do they have webinars or even classes?
That's,
Yeah, they do.
that's a lot of how you earn that award is you're
Second
doing.
question, can I get research credit?
So,
That I don't know.
No, you can't.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you do advocacy, you do Day on the Hill, if you serve a certain role, if you write a letter to the editor.
There's
or
webinars that you can do.
Yes, there's
Personal
webinars,
So
there's
it's all
classes.
point-based.
Yeah.
on how
Some of their
many
webinars are
people
asynchronous, so you don't have to sit in. If you're busy when they have it, you can tune in later and watch
I think I did a
it.
couple of them when I was eating dinner and you just
and
come on.
I think the ISB website goes through the list of
Don't talk about
opportunities
learning.
for getting those
It's on the
points.
website.
Yeah, please check out the website.
That's how you learn.
Before we get too far off of this one, a couple of things, and I don't know if it's a goal, but I think it's something that we should have on our radar for discussion. Well, one thing I'll throw out first off, in my process of talking with people about FFA, I ran into a student, an FFA president, past president of the state of Iowa, who also was a student representative on a school board and actually sat at the board table. And I brought it up at a meeting once, and that the board president at that time said, well, the student may not want to be there. Well, that's true, but I know with like our students that came in the other night and wanted to follow up and everything like that, if we were to do it in like a rotating basis and at least just have and maybe it's not up at the front table, but at one of the tables, we have a student representative, and then have an opportunity to sit in on the meeting if they wish, or if there was a topic that pertained to them. It's things that other districts do. And I was just going to throw that out as an idea, so then they feel that they are actually that other than just the opportunity to speak at community comment, they could have a seat at the table. When the discussion's going on, they would have an opportunity to interact on that discussion. That's one thing. The other one is, safety and security in our schools, discussion about security, or however you want to look at a resource officer, that type of a thing. From time to time, it does come up with us with parents, and with the situation that happened at Liberty comes, when it comes to our attention, it comes to our attention
Yeah,
like that.
when something's going down.
And it's immediate. And it's like, what have you been doing? The world, what's happened around the world, we're not immune to it. So I think we need to have, and I don't know that it's a goal, but I think it definitely needs to be on our radar that at some point in time we have a discussion on just that whole question of, is that something that we feel would be beneficial? Would it help us even too, like it in our elementaries, if we just had community resource officer mentoring, doing things in there, establishing relationships with students, that type of a thing, building block that way. But that's just one thing I want to put out there, just So I think that's going to be a discussion we'll have.
Is that discussed at the equity committee when they talk about restorative justice?
Has it or could it?
Either.
I don't think it has. I think the last time that conversation was actually at the board table.
Well, I know we got, we somewhat touched it very early on.
Right.
When Lori and I got on, when
Right.
we were changing the whole threat, and the threat assessment is the wrong thing to say, but that,
Right.
that flip chart.
Yep.
As far as, when, where do we go? And then we got into the big thing where what we had said was misinterpreted by elementary principals, that when a kid says, I'm going to kill you in first grade, that the police got called to the school, and it was taken as that instead of it's a first grader not using his language well with another individual and that. So, and then we went through that, but I think it's time, and it's best to do it before something happens and then it's reactive instead of going forward. I had some discussions with people at the University of Iowa, very good. They call it care assessment, they don't call it threat assessment. And they're very good, and it's just getting different groups that have information, sharing information. And, so many times in retrospect when they look back, somebody knew, but in our district, we have North Liberty Police, we have Coralville Police, we have Johnson County Police, we have the Iowa City Police Department, we have University Heights, and all of those entities might have information, but they don't share it with others, and they may not share it with us. So a situation where we have a student that's in a stressful situation at their home, may not be performing well in school, one of these entities knows there's something going on in that home that we don't know about. And some type of a care assessment group that can coordinate and can see, okay, if there's a lot of police calls to a home that has a student in it, that house is under a lot of stress and it's affecting that student. And so we know about it, but I went too much in the weeds on it, but I think that's something at some point in time. I don't know if
I was
it's
thinking as an action under the
FMP or the facilities.
building needs is safety and security.
Yeah.
That's what
I
I was
like
thinking
that,
too.
Like,
Very simple.
Monitor safety and security in schools as the action for that subject. And I'm thinking, because we talking about how we're putting these things in here and we've got some specific things to go sort of with the broad-based stuff, and how do we make sure that we're actually going to do any of that stuff? Is there a spot somewhere, every agenda at every board meeting, it's like board goal action update, and we pick one or two of these things and
From an accountability
start that
standpoint.
discussion, and maybe the outcome of those things are task force if you want to investigate paired schools, or it's, you know, whatever the outcome is can be very different depending on what the goal, but could you have that placeholder that we at least have a discussion on one or two specific, I don't know. 'Cause I'm trying to figure out how we make sure that we're going to do all the things we're saying.
I think it's an agenda management issue, and spacing things out, and perhaps Janet and Steve and I could kind of put a schedule together of, you know, making sure we're going to hit everything over a certain period of time. I mean, I think some of these things we hit in the normal course of business, so we don't
Right,
need
I was
to
gonna say, if there's
necessarily put
already
it.
stuff in there, we probably don't need to add additional stuff.
And I wouldn't want to just add
Or
some
a
random
work
topic
session.
just
Well,
to do it, you know.
Work session.
It'd be better if it fit in what we were already doing at the time.
What I might, and I think that's great, it might be something that goes to like an ed committee. Because that meets every month.
Some things could be.
It's all 7. It'd be the type of thing, maybe that might be a setting where that might fit just better for us logistically, as far as, you know, we try and keep the board meeting to actionable, you know, that type of thing, grinding it out. But, you know, at the ed committee, it's a good time, and it's, you know, kind of like a setting like this, and it's a good time to maybe that's a possibility.
Could be ed committee, could be a work session, it could be.
Right.
It's a
Could be
variety.
both,
Yes.
depending on where it's.
Yeah.
I just-
Yeah.
Some things will fit better in
I just want
different
to make sure that
formats.
we're not having these delusions of grandeur, and we're having these great ideas of all the things we want to do, and then all of a sudden it's May,
Yeah.
we didn't do squat.
Yeah, and it's
Right.
already December, right? So we've got 6
Yeah.
months to do this.
Well,
Not till
we'll
Friday.
see that feeling, but
Not till
we
Friday.
also have done a lot. There's just so much.
It's more you get back to next year's agenda setting, and you're looking at
Yes.
that goal setting and the ones that you had before.
Yeah, I think
It's about
that's
being
what-
intentional about how we spend our time, I think. I'm sorry, Dan.
No, but I think you're right, and that was actually sort of going through my head a little bit, are we biting off too much? So let me take a crack at taking all the input from folks and crafting up what this set of board goals would, a crack at what the actions would look like. And circulate to the group for reaction and editing and adding to or taking off or whatever.
I,
Because
for one, am glad to let you do that.
Because, you know, I think for me, I think we've got all these ideas on the table. I think seeing something in writing
You
now
will do a
is
great
what.
job at that.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight, make sure, I don't know if you took Jane made an excellent point.
I've
I
got
really
it.
did like that. I
Boardsmanship.
wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, no, I've got it under the board development item, whatever that ends up being. So I'll take a crack at it.
Because 5 of us talked about that very briefly at the orientation that we went to and Steve was at, but, you know, it's nothing that we expanded on.
Yeah.
So that's actually, we're coming up on that on the agenda is board orientation. So before we get there, we had an item on budget priorities. I think this was just a quick follow-up to the presentation that Craig did last week. Was, by the way, I wish he was here so I could thank him for it. It was immensely helpful for me to, and hopefully for all of the board members, even veterans, to just see the landscape, some of the history of how we do our budgeting, of course, all the constraints I'll say we have. And my big takeaway too was, and I kind of left with worry, you referenced it a little while ago, I mean, we don't, first of all, we don't have a ton of discretionary use of the budget that we have. So much of it's already allocated to salaries and programming, et cetera, mostly salaries. So within, you know, kind of limited discretionary activities, there was the process that Craig outlined where there's opportunities for board members to have inputs in that planning cycle. From what I recall, unfortunately, we've already missed some of those to be in kind of in sequence. But I did want to raise the topic, you know, is there a desire of the board to have a conversation around budget priorities within the framework that Craig presented? And if we don't think that, given, I mean, the timing is really tight. The other thing that I wanted to somehow put on the table, I don't know if this is relevant or not, is I'm mindful of Chapter 20 changes and needing to get to the point of, employment policies, if that's the direction that we take, which I think that's where we're heading. But are there any budget priorities that we would set related to teachers' compensation or pairs, et cetera? I mean, I know that there's going to start, if there isn't already, be concern of our teaching staff on what we're going to do there. And as soon as we can get some agreement on the approach and the timing and our priorities, I think, to that group, that would be really helpful.
So the first step in your process is December 12th, there'll be an exempt session prior to the board meeting where Jane will lay out where we're at with the collective bargaining process. It will
That's
not
coming
include
right up.
teachers, because remember, we did a 2-year deal with the teachers to
Yeah.
give us some breathing room after they put that legislation in place. No editorializing, just that legislation in place. So we got some breathing room there. We've gone through the recertification votes with the other groups, so she'll bring you up to speed on that, and then she'll kind of walk through, here's how negotiations work in the district, talk a little bit about parameters and how we go about that process, and then recognizing again that the good news is, we're looking the long vision with our teachers, but we're also somewhat compressed because she's going to talk about the employee handbook that we're working to put together, and we only want one employee handbook with appendices for each of our groups, so that there's some uniformity across all employees in the district. So she'll kind of walk you through what we're doing with that, so you know where that's going. Because even though we're not negotiating with the teachers, we're working with them and our other employee groups, we're working with them as we develop that process. So you get that on December 12th, and a little bit more, stole a little bit of your thunder from the 12th, but
Because we're seeing other districts making shifts in how.
They are.
And so I know that I've already had some questions around, what are we going to do,
we're going to watch the pendulum do this for a little bit.
Real quick, just so I don't forget, that my first board retreat, when we were allotting everybody into committees and whatnot, we skipped putting people on negotiating stuff pending all those groups recertifying.
Right.
So nobody's on.
So we'll have to do that, and we can do that at that December 12th meeting.
Okay.
We can do that.
I'm out for a lot of that. And so is Lori. We can't be on any SEIU.
You got it, yeah, okay.
So,
And I should be on fiscal plan.
does it?
Have it rather than laws.
Yeah.
Besides, I mean, I go.
Going back to the main question of the budget priorities, the one thing I got out of Craig talking is kind of where we have the impact is with the superintendent directives, right? That kind of then starts to drive some of that other stuff. And I think as we again, all the stuff we're talking about, paired schools, year-round school, whatever other things we're thinking outside the box and looking at stuff, that in the end, I think will drive those directives
Right.
to then create budget priorities. I think we clearly have probably missed the boat on making that happen now, but we definitely need to do that work now so it's ready for future, because if we say, well, we missed it, let's talk about it a year from now, and then we're going to
Miss it again,
Yeah.
right.
And that's, like I said, we need to talk about that when the snow's on the ground, so you're ready to go when spring break hits earlier.
Yeah.
This is the same kind of thing. So I wouldn't say miss the boat on it, because structurally, that's not the way elections are set up in the state. I mean, you guys come in, you're getting on a moving bus. You don't have the background or the time at that point to say, hey, let's do this.
Yeah.
So, but it is part of that process of learning and coming up to speed and figuring out what's next, so that as those decision points come along the path, you're ready to make those decisions. And
Yeah.
so you get that community input, you say, let's do year-round schools, let's do paired schools, and then you're able to give us directions which we can then operationalize, and then come back and say, what's the budget implications for that?
basically the sooner we can get to the decision-making part of it,
Absolutely.
the sooner we can implement it, and whether we say, hey, we can still do it in fall of 2018, or, well, it's going to have to be 19 or 20 or whatever.
Yeah, the sooner that you get those, the sooner we can work on doing the analysis and
Yeah.
come back and say, this is what it means for staffing, this is what it means for the budget, this is what it means for, I don't know, transportation, food service, all the rest of those dominoes that get knocked over.
Well, I'd say, Steve, that obviously FRL balance is a huge part of that, but I don't think we can underestimate looking for staffing efficiencies. I mean, it's just.
Oh, no. Yep.
We're going to be,
Yep.
and I'm certainly willing to contribute some creative ideas, and I've had I'm sure some of my teacher friends will not be their favorite person sometimes. But I think we have to get creative. We just have no room, because the playbook for negotiating was always very scripted. And Chapter 20 laid it out, and nobody deviated from the script on either side.
Yep.
And I think now there's no script.
Yep.
And so we got to make something up. And I hope that it's not just like Waterloo.
Well,
Health insurance.
And you can see those efficiencies that you were talking about when you look at that elementary staffing chart, and you can see where it's green and where it's red. And in a perfect world, it would flow. You would see it flow from green to red as you went from high needs to low needs. You would see that happen, but you don't. You don't see a linear relationship. You see this kind of up and down, and it's because of the inefficiencies that are baked into the model.
Any other, so I think what we're saying is we need to get onto that planning cycle and make sure that we're plugging in at the appropriate time and being ready to have those informed discussions, but in the right time frame. Okay, shifting gears to board development, board member orientation. That was a nice segue, James, that we had to have that one little bit on the budget priorities, but there's tons of material here. This was part of the last board retreat agenda, all of these items in here. I don't know if we need to have a big discussion around them, other than to have, just encourage folks to review these materials and, go through them unless
I was
there's.
just going to say, when Jane chimed in about board members knowing what their role is, what they can do, what they can't
Yeah.
do. I remember from the orientation and one of the workshops, I don't remember which one it was at the convention, was a lot of scenarios where it's, here, try this out, what would you do there? And most of it was based on the premise that outsiders looking in don't know what your job is, right? Like they're asking you to do something you can or can't do. I mean, we were being tested whether we knew we could do or not do it, but I think that's a very real thing. Like, it's not just educating us on what we can and can't do, it really is educating the community, like, this is what we're gonna do. And maybe having our vision and mission, like our goal, like all that stuff being very clear and transparent and available for everybody, shows everybody what we think our job is and what we're going to try and do to accomplish that. But that struck me as, we should know what we can and can't do, but it seems like we have to respond to a lot of people saying, why don't you make this happen? Because I can't make that happen. Certainly not by myself.
Sorry you don't like your daughter's coach.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, coaching morning is good.
I mean, those are things.
Well, I think everything that's in that section, the 5 of us that went to orientation, it was all in that packet too, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I found there. It was super helpful professional development. Just, they know their stuff.
Well, and the ISB website's got tons of materials on it too for any of these topics. And so it's really good. And I think if we have a board development goal, it's incumbent upon us to really dig into these things, review it, get familiar, and practice. Just practice.
Yeah, well, it's the kind of thing where going into it, I was like, I got a pretty good handle on this. I know what's going on. And for the most part, it's like, yep, got it. And then one little thing can be like, didn't realize that, and you don't know what you don't know. So I think every now and then you'll find that little tidbit that maybe clarifies something else. I went to the Finance 201 thing, and I was like, yeah, I know how different buckets work, and I know this, that, and the other thing, and then like the whole SBRC thing didn't make sense to me until I went to that class. Now I totally get it, how that works. And, you just find these little nuggets here and there. And if you just sort of like skim through half the stuff passively and find something, I think it's worth it.
So the next item around the standards for effective school boards is kind of along the same lines. I mean, it's that one handbook is giant, but the standards are, we should know them, and the thing is too, is being consistent. So you've got a community member that comes to me and I'm like, oh yeah, sure, we can make that happen. And they go to Lori, she's like, oh no way, can we do that? I mean, it's so that we're consistent, this message out to the community that, you know, we're all on the same page. So I thought these standards were, I mean, there's only 6 of them, they're pretty useful to make sure we had a good grounding in. And that's a much shorter document than the actual long giant handbook. But so these standards I thought were interesting and something we should be holding ourselves up to, you know, to performing against, which then led me to put an agenda item around a board self-assessment. This was, I'll confess, I'm a data geek. I like to collect data, get some baseline information from in an objective way, then to craft, you know, whatever kinds of action plans, improvement plans might be necessary, change plans, whatever. Or just to say, hey, we're doing great. We might not need to change anything, stay the course. But also at the ISB convention, I went to a session where there was a presentation on boards doing this kind of self-assessment process, and they had 3 different districts that were presenting their approach to it, and all of them found it to be immensely healthy, good way to continuously improve their work. And that's what it's all about, is continuous improvement. It's getting good information that we can then operate from. And so it's the reason why I wanted to put it on the agenda, to get a sense from the team of that something that sounds relevant and useful. It's something I think we could put out in a Qualtrics kind of online survey. Steve said that your team could put that together, respond to the questions. There's room for, you know, qualitative input, you know, written comments or whatever. This is about us as a team taking that information and creating, you know, ideas for maybe the specific actions under our board development board goal that we just talked about that might lead to some specific things that we want to cover. The other thing that I thought would be interesting to get input from this assessment would be to inform board norms. And so I know that was the next agenda item, but there's a lot of things in here, and I'm not quite sure how the process was for establishing these board norms. I'd love to hear that context. But it feels like getting some of that data from that assessment might actually help us finalize what we want our board norms to be. This is probably 90% of what we want it to be, but there might be a few tweaks that we would make based on that data that we collected. I would also add some of in the session that I attended, that the best practices from all 3 districts were to do a board self-assessment, but also include key stakeholders in that. So folks like Amy and Matt and Jane and Craig, and perhaps ICEA, Brady or Mitch, perhaps some principals. So to not just make it about us, but we have stakeholders that are interacting and engaging with us, and so to get that view of our performance as a board too. So it's more of a 360 kind of evaluation, and so I'm a huge fan of that approach. I think it would be fairly time effective if we can do it through this online approach. And I think Steve said your team could actually maybe do some of the data analysis in terms of, you know, the average score per item and that kind of thing.
Qualtrics will crank all that out. I don't know if you guys have used Qualtrics before, but it emails an anonymous link to each of the users, so the data comes in clean. It has no connection. You can't forward it on. Somebody else can't take it. Only you can take it. But once you've taken it, then data comes in, and it has no identifying information connected to it. So it just uploads, and then there's a database that can show you all the descriptive statistics, and it'll aggregate all the free response answers, so they just come as a text block. So
I would, if we're going to include stakeholders, I'd always like to find a way to include students.
Oh.
I just think that's who we're teaching. And finding those students who engage with, I mean, obviously they're going to have some concept of the board.
might be your student reps.
It could be student reps.
Student
That's a really
reps.
They
good
see you
idea.
on a regular basis.
Or they could even, you know, maybe there's a student council or something.
Sure.
Because most schools have
Student
student
government.
government, student senate, something of that nature that do understand what the board role is, and on some level may.
Well, but it's an avenue, kind of
Right.
having somebody there, like it's a learning opportunity for them, and it's a way to see how, I mean, that's who we're here for.
I'm not against that. I'm just looking through if we're using the questions that are on here. It's going to be really hard for any student to answer any of these.
Some of them, yeah.
Some of them they won't know, some of them we won't know.
I guess we have the option.
And we could just say, give us your written comments.
We could.
You know?
Could do that. we also looked at it, because I went through these questions, and we would actually add, it says a 1 to 7 scale, and I'd actually recommend that there be an NA in there, because I think if you're going to
Yeah,
include, for
I think
instance,
that's
Amy and
right.
Matt, there's going to be a bunch of them that they're not, it's not going to be applicable for them to answer, so we want to make sure that they're not putting a score in because it forces them to do that. We want to give them an out so that they don't have to do that. Now, if you're including ICEA, there might be some of these questions that they don't want to answer or that they don't think are applicable. So again,
So
I think we could give them an
NA.
out with an NA at the end.
I think it's the self-assessment part is the board members. I mean, I'm looking on here and, I don't know, pat myself on the back. I'd like to think that some, tenured board members would give better scores now than you would have 6 months ago maybe. Because I feel like we've done a good job trying to open lines of communication and that kind of stuff. And, I think this is a way to track, and, are we still doing it? Like, I think, a lot of us were like, hey, we want the board to be better. We want to accomplish stuff. How do we know that we're doing that?
So, on a self-assessment, maybe then that's important just for the board, but we want other people's feedback. So it's another like questions that are applicable to those folks, and because I'd love feedback from people like how I'm doing, other than the board, you know what I mean? And so maybe that tool isn't perfect, or for people. If we're gonna get a lot of NAs, it might not be. But is there a board assessment tool other than an election? It would be nice to have.
I would just say anecdotally, I have had folks who sat in our audience or watched on TV, and after our first couple of meetings as a group, they're like, you guys all look pretty comfortable up there and having good conversations. And they're like, we didn't really see that before. So people are noticing.
I've heard positive comments from people.
I want to make sure that we don't fall into the same traps, right? Because we do all have egos, and at some point, something's going to tick one of us off, and maybe we'll start behaving in a way that will make things go backwards, right? Or tonight, whatever. And then, and I think it's important to say, hey, you're starting to slack a little bit, and, we need to make sure that we're still doing it. And I think doing this, I don't know, at a reasonable time frame, like not one time. Right.
No, this should, I
Multiple
think this
times,
is
and I don't know how long
every year.
But it should, I think it might be better to do it more than annually.
It could be.
I like the idea. It gives you a numerical thing, gives you nice concise to just sort of see the trend. I guess, I get 360 reviews at work as a manager, so my boss tracks all my little numbers that I have. And, if there's one that's sliding or one that's going up, we look at both of those and say, all right, what do we do here to make it go up? And what are we missing here to make it go down? And I think it's helpful because at least it brings your attention back to it, just holding that mirror up. And as a group, I think we can benefit. I like it.
So if we agree to go this approach, I was actually hoping we could complete the survey before the holidays. Because again, if we can get it online, it's probably 30 minutes to go in and fill this out, I'm guessing. I don't think it's a huge time commitment just to complete the survey. And then after the new year, come back and kind of look at the results and, where do we want to focus? Where are we doing great? Where do we want to have some improvements? And then use that data again to, action planning and board development perhaps, board norms perhaps. There may be some of the things that come out of the data. Does that seem reasonable, that sort of time frame?
No. Is there I don't know. I mean, I'm not super in favor of pressing it. I mean, I'm for it. I'm just saying, I don't know if we have to recap it over the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
How about before MLK Day?
Before MLK Day. Okay.
Well, I guess I looked how fast can we put it into some sort of
it'd take too long.
available link. And
She thought she'd actually have it done by the end of the day today. I just gave it to her and said, can you plug this into Qualtrics? She'll do it with the radio button, so it'll literally be.
That's just
Well, yeah, I would say.
The analysis and the coming back, that would be after.
She
the
might need a
meeting.
little time for that.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the
fine. I
January
just-
time
yeah,
frame. This was just to
that's-
collect the data before
Yeah,
the holidays.
right, I don't think, and you're saying the holidays are January 1. I mean,
No, somewhere in there,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, no, I think the January 1 deadline is very doable.
And then, yeah, then we'll do the analysis and stuff in January and start doing it, maybe towards the end of January. so.
You were just talking, going through this and giving
Responses
one
to
to
it.
seven
Yeah.
responses.
Yep,
or
yeah.
any-
It'll come to you and you'll just click,
Yeah.
click, 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 click,
And
click.
it'll be on it'll come to us
Yep.
through our email, I'm
Yep.
assuming, or something.
And then there'll be a text block at the bottom. She was kind of mocking it up while I was
Yeah.
standing
Sure.
there, and there'll be a text block. You can
No,
type in.
yeah.
She said she wouldn't even
First
delete
year,
it by
that's-
character, so you put as much in as you want to.
So I
Okay,
could
good.
put Ruthina's mean to me.
You can.
I'm not gonna sit next to Ruth, don't let me sit next to
You
Ruth.
can answer for someone else, I've always wanted.
So thank you all for that.
I
and
think
thank
it
you,
says somewhere in the
Kristen.
directions, you're not supposed to name fellow
Oh,
It
board
does.
members.
It does.
Okay.
Probably don't say the person who threatened to punch me in the throat, and then,
Per what Matt, please explain, so I can be on the
German-
record.
German
Thank you.
Love tap, really, to the throat.
Okay, so our next item, I'm sorry, I've lost the agenda in front of me.
Board norms
Board
is the next
norms,
one.
Okay, thank you. I've got too many tabs open and I can't.
Board norms
think
and
of
building
them.
tours.
So I was thinking, instead of trying to dig in a whole bunch on the board norms and stuff tonight, unless you guys want to have a deep conversation about it, that we'd wait to get the assessment data back and then dig into the norms in kind of more of a session just focused on that.
I would agree with that. I mean, figure out where we're at before we try and
Okay?
figure out where we should be, really. Get that baseline.
So we're going to push that off till we get the assessment data. And so then the last item was around building tours. And so this was a follow-up to, just to get alignment with the board on what we want to do in terms of visiting buildings, frequency. I think we wanted to get like Thursday meetings scheduled through
Well,
the end of the year.
If I can, just
Sure.
I think that was something on the operations committee, or very early on. We discussed evaluating some of our new construction
Mhm.
projects. Royce Peterson with the 1260 Carpenters was very interested in being part of that. Also, I had been approached by community members that were interested in looking at buildings that way, plus my own interest in that. And that's why I started by contacting a principal that I knew very well at Lincoln, and it was worked out very well because Lincoln's on the plan and there's construction going on, and it was very timely. It was great. I'm trying to remember the fiscal plant person that was there, was able to answer questions, and Langenfeld was gracious with their time, who I've known since our daughters were in school together, so that's why I chose that building to start off with. And that's what I was trying to do. Now, if other board members are interested in coming and being part of these, I think that's phenomenal. And I understand that if we exceed a quorum, then we have open records, or open meetings concerns and those things. But if that presents itself, that's an issue, but I don't see it being that way. But if it is that way, we will have to abide by it. But if an individual wanted to look at all of our buildings that way, essentially you got to be knocking off one a week just by the sheer number of buildings that we have. And that's why I wanted to try and set it up on a single day, so then that way, for my own personal jealous reasons, it would be easier for me just to kind of schedule my business schedule. So, okay, I know Thursday afternoons I'm going to have a week, I'm going to be doing this. Community members could know, they could put it on their schedules that we're interested in doing this as well. And, maybe make it so staff could pick a day when it would work into their schedule to do it with so many buildings, figure out a way to do it. So that's how it was. So, if there's others interested in going and being a part of it, I think I welcome anyone who wants to be it. But I did, it's not the type of thing like we're making it what do I say? It wasn't, the intent wasn't to just make it as huge as it seems to be.
Well, so there's a couple things. I mean, one, I really do believe we need to find our ways into school buildings and interact with staff and principals and teachers and kids or whatever. I know we've talked about education committee meetings being in different schools and kind of rotating that way. DPO, not all of us go to those all the time, but those are in schools as well. We need to do it. I just don't know what the proper best way of accomplishing it is. I also have, this is just my own opinion, I'm feeling a little uneasy with the community members who are attending. I understand that we've got community members who are interested in seeing buildings, but I don't know why I'm just feeling a little bit squeamish about that. And so, I don't know. I'm just,
Well, and
because do we offer this to any community member? Are we, saying, hey, show up at Liberty and, for open houses and the grand opening, and of course.
well,
but-
we have that, and I guess I never lose track of the fact that they're communities' buildings, they own them.
Understood, but.
Right, the middle C.
But I don't know that
and-
we extended this invitation to all community members, and so that's why that feels a little bit strange to me, that we've got a few who are kind of getting special building tours, and the
Well,
rest of our community is not really even.
Well, I don't know that any potential parent of someone going to a new school, that the principal wouldn't take them through and show them,
Of course.
that type of a thing.
And I think,
Um,
yeah.
And the reason Royce Peterson comes in with some special expertise, assessing, fit and finish of our buildings, which I think is helpful.
But are we asking him to provide his opinion on the fit and fitness? That just feels odd to me too, when we've got a facilities team that's doing that. I mean, I don't know, it just, I was likening it to my board bringing in, test center management experts to oversee the quality of my team's work, and I just don't know that doesn't feel like the right goal, in my opinion, for bringing community members in. They're going to be coming in and assessing, and I'm not sure what they're going to be evaluating and how they're going to feed that information back. And I'm all for board members being in buildings, and I think if any of us called, but as a candidate, I was welcomed into schools, and I was given innumerable tours over the summer. I'm uncomfortable with the community members, the specific set of community members that we've asked for these sessions, and we're not opening that up more broadly. And it feels like we're bringing in extra people to provide input on our district staff's performance, and I'm uncomfortable with that. So I just don't know that this is a forum that's something that I fully understood when we were setting these up. I saw the email exchanges, but I think if we're looking for that kind of evaluation, we need to work through the district on what the means for that is. And I just am very uncomfortable with us taking that kind of action, bringing community members into that.
Well,
That's my opinion.
okay. I guess I don't see it that way, and I guess that's a difference. I also have a problem with the fact that as candidates, many of you met with Lisa Glenn when I was not able to, and I'm a board member, and I requested that. So, that's an issue too. I don't really see it as evaluation. I think it's more of getting a free second opinion with Royce Peterson looking at our facilities.
So I would be, if we're looking for that kind of opinion, I think we need to bring people in as a
Sure.
contractor and pay them to give us
I've
an
got-
opinion if that's what we're looking for.
And I've got no problem as having it as an advertised open house. But then that gets more involved. The one at Lincoln was 4 people, including myself. It wasn't Ben. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the guy from the fiscal plans.
Jeff Barnes.
Jeff Barnes, thank you. Showing us around, and Ann Langenfeld. And it was for me, it was extremely beneficial going on the hill at Lincoln and being able to look at where that new construction was going in and how it was piecing in and the issues with the hill and everything concerned with it. It was extremely helpful, and it's timely.
So I'm good with board members. It's
I
the-
will yield to the board, and if they feel it's not, you can table the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with board members. It's the community members that I was having a little bit of heartburn about.
I think Phil, you started out by saying it was an old operations committee discussion, and we still have an operations committee, right? They just haven't met for a long time.
Yes,
So,
I agree.
I think
And
personally, I-
operations got pulled into the regular board meeting.
Personally, I would like for it to come from maybe the operations committee and then to the board as a board decision, as opposed to an individual board member decision, I guess, is the way that I felt.
Okay, now, when an individual board member wants to meet with a staffer, does he have to ask permission from all the board members?
No, because then you ask your employee who's in charge of that person to go to do that, I guess. The difference is you're setting up a community-wide building tour of every building, right? With, like Janet said, bringing in people to evaluate whatever we're evaluating in there, as opposed to going through Steve to meet with, let's say, Matt, because Steve is our employee who oversees Matt, so you have chain of command of going through there.
So I think we need to get on the same page what we're trying to accomplish, what the goals are, and how, once we understand what we're trying to accomplish, coming up with a process that we agree is good and will meet those goals. And so I actually kind of like the idea of the operations committee coming up with a recommendation for this and bringing it back. And, I mean, I think, how do we get board members into the buildings and to get the inputs? Because I'm with you, seeing the Lincoln stuff and the hill and the slope and all that stuff and the proposed building.
But I just want to know that it's not a double standard, that when one board member wants to go and do the exact same thing.
I think there's a lot of things like that that we would cover in board norms, and I think it comes back to what Jane said, knowing your roles as board members.
And again, I have less issue with board members requesting a building tour. I have more of an issue with bringing extra community members in. And I just think there's channels that we need to go through to make sure that Steve's aware, your staff is aware, this is what we're trying to accomplish with this building tour, and setting it up that way. And you know, making sure we're all on the same page what we're trying to accomplish.
I think it's being clear about the intent, right? Because I look at it from the comfort level of, the building administrator that's having people come into their building and look around. And if it's, we want to look at, your building's up for some, remodel or whatnot, we kind of want to see what some of those issues are, some of the rooms that are going to get worked on, and it's very clear that you're kind of wrap your head around what those things are and where they're at in the building and what are some of the limitations. And you can provide comfort to the building administrator that that's what you're doing. You're not there to tell them why they're doing a bad job in their building or something, right? Like if that intent is very clear, I don't see there's any problem with it. The community members, if you're specifically asking two people that are your best buddies to do it versus making it available to other people, I think if it's clear and it's available to people,
Constituents approach us on many things.
They do.
And this was, the operations committee had discussed this, constituents had expressed an interest in it, and that was my approach. And we're evaluated on everything, whether it's,
Understood.
everyone that comes in here isn't just coming, they're evaluating what goes on. So maybe my use of the word evaluation is overdone. Because there was no form, there was no nothing, there was nothing like that. It was more information that was exchanged.
I mean, I really like what Sean said about, to me, that's, just as a teacher and as a community member, I guess I would fully trust the building principal in that case to make their call, that they could have the autonomy to decide what they're comfortable with, and also have the ability, if they're uncomfortable, to say, I'd like to call Steve, or I'd like your physical plan. But I don't know, how in the weeds are we going to get if we're going to email Steve every time we want to meet with anybody? Like, that seems too much.
Well, that's technically how we should do it.
I think that's, I don't want to have a double standard here, Phil. Please do not get me wrong. In the meetings that I had with your staff as a candidate, I cleared with Steve and said, I would like to get to know you, and you're like, yes, please. I do think it is a board norm question about how we, as a board, will agree to interact with staff, principals, etc. so that we are consistent and we don't have double standards and us doing things different ways. So I think it's really an important point that you make there. We should not have double standards, and if our norms get articulated or reviewed, we can make sure that we cover that. And so the reason I wanted to talk about this tonight was because I think we've got these tours set up every Thursday night through the rest of the year. And I just wanted to make sure that we want to continue doing them, or do we need to wait and take a different approach with operations committee or whatever. Because I do understand that no one showed up for the first meeting, and I know we had folks on call to tour people, and I don't know.
Well, the first meeting, there was talk of clearing it with someone, and there was no confirmation that that actually happened.
And so we had
There
misunderstanding
was
or
a breakdown. There was
communications.
a breakdown in communication.
And so if we're going to.
I thought I was pretty clear in my communication. If you're interested in going, email Kim. Nobody emailed Kim. Nobody
Right,
contacted her,
but
nobody called her.
There was no confirmation that it was going to, Dwayne was checking to see if there would be anyone there. And that never came forward.
The email was crystal clear, the time, the location, and what to do.
Are they scheduled the rest of the year?
I think they're
We've
gonna-
held
I
off.
haven't seen the schedule yet.
So I'd like to suggest, I like the idea since it originated from the operations committee, that group hasn't met yet since this new crew of board members have come on. Let's have that operations committee meet, let's talk about building tours, what we're trying to accomplish, bring it back to the full board and Steve and team and say, okay, this is our approach going forward. Because I'm with you, getting into the buildings is important. I think I would like to discuss community members and how we do that, and then how we interact with Steve's team, the building principal, make sure we're all on the same page of how we're going to organize things. I was just hesitant to continue with what had been proposed for the rest of the calendar year until we had, a broader discussion. Are we okay with going with the operations committee meeting and having the
That's fine.
conversation? Can you remind me who's on operations committee? I think I am, I'm
You
pretty
are.
sure I am.
You are, I am, and Sean is.
Okay, so we need to get that group scheduled. Should, the three of us are allowed to email because there's only three of us, and we can arrange a time. I think all of our Tuesdays are pretty well covered, but I can initiate an email so that at least we can get and Steve, who from your team participates in operations committee?
Me, Craig, Dwayne, Jane. I think that's the four because it's usually that operation side of the house, HR
Okay.
and facilities.
So we should maybe have a goal. I know we're getting close to the end of it. It'd be nice if we could at least meet once, the operations week before
Sure.
the end of the year.
I have no problem with it, but, and if there is a schedule that's established, if it could be shared.
I don't think there is one.
There is not yet.
And so I don't think we've met as a
Okay.
team. I don't think we have a chair. I don't think we have.
Well, no, I'm saying in the inspection schedule. I haven't seen the
It's
schedule.
not set
I don't
up, sounds
think
like
it's
he
set
hasn't done it.
Right.
Okay, good. I mean, yeah, good.
Right, so
Okay, good.
we will discuss it and go through it.
Okay, good. And I'll take the initiative to try to figure out a meeting time for the operations committee. And so, thank you for that conversation. The very, very, very last thing is not on the agenda. I hope I'm allowed to do this. I just wanted to cover with the board, we've got this Saturday, the mental health special ed disability PTO. And I know a number of folks had expressed an interest in participating. I just maybe thought we should do a quick poll of who all was planning to go there to make sure we're not violating any quorum. So, were there folks planning to go to that on Saturday?
It's in the evening, right? I have it on my calendar. I had it on my calendar as tentative, but I'll know for sure Wednesday if I'm able to go.
Okay. Were there other
It does
folks?
not work.
When's that? Where-
Could you remind us of the time and place?
Yeah, I think I put it on my calendar. And this group is, I think it's a really nice new initiative. It's at the Coralville Public Library, 1 to 3.
Yeah.
So Rufina's a maybe, JP's a yes.
I'll put myself as something, do they have a time frame on how long it's supposed to go? Was it 1 to 3? 1 to 3, okay.
And like I said, I'll know definitely, I'm just working out the work schedule.
Can do? Yeah, you can.
So maybe communicate with Kim, who can be the point person, and make sure we don't have,
So we'll have Phil, Rufina, JP, and then if anything, if you guys decide that you're not able to make it or whatever, just let Kim know, maybe? I had sort of wanted to go, but I'm going to defer to others who have an interest, but if someone's not able to, I might. Others, Paul can't, Lori or Sean can't do.
So we don't have to worry about 4. We don't really have to worry about 4.
Only if those two show up unexpectedly with 3 of you.
Okay, is there anything else we should cover tonight?
I'm sorry, just a quick question.
Yes.
Not on the agenda, but there is the Carmichael Art Show this 30th. I don't know, so like Wednesday, Thursday? I don't know if people on here have kids that will have artwork in the show. I do plan on going, so.
That's actually a good point of clarification for you. So board members who are not meeting, but who are in the same place, may be without having to post a meeting. So if you go to a student art show, if you go to 12 Angry Jurors, if you go to, if you are at one of those places and all of you are present, you go to Good Time, or whatever it is, you're present at one of those functions, that does not have to be posted.
Okay.
Obviously, if you're there, you probably want to refrain from all going off into the corner and talking to each other, because that's not going to look good. But you may be present in those places.
Thank
Get in a
you.
little circle and start pointing at things.
Yes.
The secret
Yeah.
handshakes. Yeah.
Well, and something that was, and then this is sort of off agenda, something that was brought to my attention by a former board member who's also a law professor, so that narrows it down, was talking about social media and board members being on social media sites and communicating that could potentially violate open meetings law. Because even if you're a member of it and you're not commenting on it, the thought is that it could be part of that conversation or that way.
So I need to go off of ICCSD chat
Upon that
and-
advice, I removed myself from one that I followed but never communicated on that way. So I'm just throwing that out as an FYI.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a gray area legislatively right now, but
And there is
the cautious side is.
It's never been tested.
Yep.
But it is potentially
Yeah,
a
that's good.
meeting without being posted.
Yeah.
So.
So it's called a serial meeting. So a serial meeting is when you have a series of communications. And a social media forum could serve in a serial role. If Lori says something, 15 community members say something, then Janet, in a sense, responds to Lori's, even though there's an intermediary
Yeah,
sitting
that's
there.
really, really
Then there's
good.
15 more, then JP says
Then
something.
what if somebody else wants to say something,
Yeah.
but they can't because,
Or they're a
Yeah.
member, or they're just a
But-
member of the communication group.
Yeah.
What if there's a blog and all the comments are anonymous?
I don't know.
Social media is.
Social media is a slippery slope.
Think of the end, so
Well,
chat.
that's good. I posted some stuff, my notes from the Alexandria visit on one of the sites at the request of a community member, but I'm realizing now I probably should have
Yeah.
done that.
probably, if you just put it on liaison reports, so
That's
you
what I
and
need.
Yeah, you
everybody
do
can
that.
see it.
That's what I need to do.
Be
Oh,
transparent.
we're gonna, do we need a motion?
Move we
Yes.
adjourn.
Okay, we're adjourned.